It was the fall of 2018 when I started working the overnight shift at a long-term care facility just outside of Dayton, Ohio. I'd been a CNA for almost 4 years, bouncing between hospitals and nursing homes, but this place, Rosewood Manor, was different. It had once been a Catholic orphanage back in the 1940s before being converted into a nursing facility. The building was old, 3 floors of peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, and that faint mildew smell that never quite went away no matter how much bleach they used. There were always rumors among the staff. They said strange things happened after midnight, especially on the 3rd floor, which everyone called the Old Wing. Most of the rooms there were unoccupied now, too damaged or under renovation. Still, that didn't stop the nurses from swapping ghost stories about doors slamming on their own or the sound of children laughing when no one was around. I never believed any of that nonsense. Not until I worked my first week of nights. The first few shifts were uneventful. I did my rounds, checked vitals, emptied bedpans, and restocked medical supplies. It was lonely, but peaceful. The building's silence was broken only by the occasional cough or the distant hum of the central heating. My partner for those shifts was a woman named Cheryl, a talkative, middle-aged nurse with tired eyes and a smoker's rasp. She'd worked there 15 years and told me, if you start hearing footsteps upstairs, just ignore it. You'll drive yourself crazy otherwise. I laughed it off at first, but she wasn't smiling when she said it. It was around 2:30 a.m. on a Thursday when I started hearing it, the sound of footsteps above us. The 3rd floor was supposed to be completely empty, with no patients or staff up there. The sound wasn't random either. It was rhythmic, steady. Step, step, pause. Step, step, pause. It went on for almost a full minute before stopping. I turned to Cheryl. "You hear that?" I asked. She didn't look up from her chart. "Just ignore it." That was her answer for everything. I couldn't, though. I needed to see. Curiosity got the better of me, so I grabbed my flashlight and told her I'd be right back. The elevator creaked as it carried me to the 3rd floor. The doors opened with a reluctant groan. The hallway ahead was pitch dark, the motion sensors for the lights long broken. I stepped out, my flashlight beam slicing through the darkness. It was colder up there. My breath came out in faint puffs, which was strange since the heat was always on full blast in the rest of the building. I started walking, my shoes squeaking against the worn linoleum floor. The rooms were empty. Dusty beds, abandoned wheelchairs, boxes of medical supplies from decades ago. Everything was still, except for the faint hum of a fluorescent bulb somewhere in the distance. Then I heard something. A door closing. Not slamming, but clicking shut softly, almost deliberately. "Hello," I called out. My voice echoed down the hallway. No answer. I shined the flashlight toward the sound, stopping in front of room 312. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The beam revealed an empty bed and an overturned chair. The curtain by the window fluttered gently, though the window was closed. I stepped inside and looked around. Nothing seemed out of place, until I noticed the corner. There were footprints, small ones, bare, child-sized, leading from the window toward the bed and stopping at the doorway where I stood. My stomach dropped. The dust around the footprints had been disturbed recently. I felt the hairs on my arms rise. I backed out slowly, my heart pounding. Then, from behind me, I heard something that froze me in place. A whisper. Faint, childlike. "Can you help me?" I turned around so fast I nearly dropped the flashlight. No one was there. The air felt colder now, heavy. I started backing away, my pulse hammering in my ears. Then something moved at the far end of the hall, a figure small, maybe 4 feet tall, standing motionless in the dark. I shined my flashlight at it, and for a split second, I saw a pale face, hollow eyes reflecting the light like a cat's. Then it was gone. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back on the 2nd floor, gasping for air. Cheryl looked up from her paperwork and smirked like she'd seen it all before. "You went up there, didn't you?" she said. I didn't answer. I couldn't. After that, things started changing. Every night I'd hear the same footsteps overhead, always around 2:30 a.m. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, a shadow darting behind a doorway, a flicker of motion in a dark corner. One night I was doing rounds when the intercom crackled to life. It was an old system, rarely used except for emergencies. A child's voice came through, soft and static-filled. "Room 312, it said. My heart nearly stopped. I looked toward the nurse's station, but Cheryl wasn't there. I grabbed the phone to call her, but the line was dead. Every instinct screamed at me to stay put, but I couldn't. I had to know. The elevator doors opened on the third floor, revealing darkness again. The same cold air. I made my way down the hallway toward room 312. The door was closed this time. I could hear something inside. Soft sobbing. A child's cry. My throat tightened. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. "Is someone there?" The crying stopped. I reached for the door handle, but it was ice cold. The moment I touched it, the sobbing started again, louder, closer. I yanked the door open and stepped inside, flashlight trembling in my hand. The room was empty, except the bed wasn't. There was an imprint, small, like a child had just been sitting there. The sheets were indented, the pillow slightly sunken. I froze. The flashlight flickered, and for a split second I saw something sitting on the edge of the bed. A small figure with matted hair, skin pale and cracked like porcelain. Its eyes were black holes, and its mouth was open too wide, as if it were screaming silently. Then the light went out. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, the flashlight clattering to the floor. I could hear movement, slow footsteps approaching me. My hands shook as I scrambled for the light. When it flickered back on, the figure was inches from my face. Its voice was a whisper, soft and broken. "You're not supposed to be here." I ran. I don't even remember how I got back down to the second floor. Cheryl was waiting by the nurse's station, cigarette trembling between her fingers. She looked pale. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "She was one of the orphans," Cheryl said, staring down at the floor. "They say she died up there, locked in a closet. Nobody found her for weeks. I didn't sleep that day. I didn't come back the next night either. I quit." Cheryl called me a few days later just to check in. I could hear fear in her voice. "They moved someone into 312, she said. "New patient. But every night the call light goes off by itself. They keep saying they hear a little girl singing." I blocked the number after that. Still, sometimes when I close my eyes at night, I can hear the sound of small footsteps above me. Slow, deliberate. Step, step, pause, and a faint voice whispering from somewhere deep in the dark. "Can you help me?" Story the end. It was the winter of 2019 when I took a job as a night security guard at an old meat packing plant in Indiana. The place had been around since the 1940s, but it had shut down for years before reopening as a cold as storage warehouse. They said the new owners had renovated it, but that was a stretch. Most of the walls were still stained, the floors cracked, and the smell of raw meat never really left. The hours were rough. 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. I was the only guard on duty overnight. My job was simple. Monitor the security cameras, walk the floors every couple of hours, and make sure the massive freezers stayed sealed. The pay was good for a night shift, and I needed the money. What I didn't need were the things I started seeing after midnight. The first couple of nights went smoothly. I kept my radio clipped to my shoulder, the static humming quietly in the background. The whole building had this constant low hum from the refrigeration units, which somehow made the silence even worse. The cameras covered the main hallways, the dock area, the old production floor, and the freezers. On my third night, around 2:30 a.m., I noticed something odd on the monitors. Camera 6, the one watching the east freezer, showed movement, a figure walking slowly between the storage racks. I assumed it was a worker who forgot to clock out, but when I radioed for confirmation, no one answered. I switched to the night shift channel. Still nothing. I zoomed the camera in. The figure looked strange. Tall, but oddly misshapen, like its shoulders were uneven. The feed flickered, distorting the image, and for a split second, it looked like the person had no face. Just smooth, pale skin where eyes and a mouth should have been. Then the screen went to static. I sat there frozen, waiting for the feed to come back. When it did, the freezer was empty. I told myself it was a glitch. Those cameras were ancient. But something about the image stuck with me. I did a quick patrol anyway, flashlight in hand. The east freezer was kept at below freezing, and the metal door was always sealed tight. I had to swipe my key card to open it. Inside, rows of meat hung from hooks, plastic wrapped and labeled. My breath fogged the air as I stepped inside. Everything looked normal until I turned the corner and saw it, a trail of wet footprints on the floor leading deeper into the freezer. Bare footprints. Human. My throat went dry. I followed the trail a few steps before stopping myself. The temperature felt even colder now, biting through my jacket. I turned back toward the exit, but just as I did, something banged against the wall behind me. Loud. I spun around. Nothing. Just rows of hanging meat swaying slightly. I left immediately, my boots slipping slightly on the icy floor. When I got back to the security office, my radio hissed with static. Then, through the static, I heard something that made my stomach drop. A voice. Faint. Garbled. "Help me." I stared at the radio. "Who is this?" I said, my voice shaking. The static grew louder. Then again, that same voice. "Cold." I switched channels. Silence. I tried to call the site supervisor, but my phone had no signal inside the building. It was after 3 a.m. now, and I told myself I'd make it through the shift and quit the next morning. But things didn't stop there. Around 4 a.m., the motion sensor in the main hallway triggered an alert. The monitor flicked on. Someone was walking toward the security office. My stomach tightened. I could see the figure clearly this time. A tall man wearing a tattered apron, his head tilted unnaturally to one side. His clothes looked old, stained dark. I watched, frozen, as he walked straight toward my camera. Then he stopped, right in front of the lens, and slowly, deliberately turned his head until his face filled the screen. His skin was grayish, stretched tight over bone. His eyes were milky white, sunken deep. His mouth hung open slightly, lips torn at the edges. He looked directly into the camera, and then the screen went black. I jumped up from my chair, heart hammering. I ran to the office door, but when I opened it, the hallway was empty. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, flickering. I could feel cold air brushing my neck, like someone had opened a freezer door nearby. Then, down the hall, I heard it. The sound of footsteps dragging slowly across the concrete floor. Wet, uneven. I backed into the office, locked the door, and sat with my back against it. I could hear breathing now, faint but steady, on the other side. My flashlight beam trembled as I pointed it toward the small window in the door. For a few seconds, I saw nothing. Then a shadow passed by the window, the faint outline of a hand pressed against the glass, long fingers skin pale and raw-looking, leaving a smear as it slid downward. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. The hand stayed there for a few moments before finally disappearing. At 5:45 a.m., the morning shift arrived. I heard the front door open and someone calling my name. I hesitated before unlocking the office door. My supervisor, Dave, stood there with a cup of coffee in his hand, looking at me like I'd seen a ghost. "Jesus, man," he said. "You look awful. You okay?" I didn't answer. I just pointed at the monitors. "There was someone here," I said, "in the freezer, on the cameras." He frowned and leaned over the screens. "They've been offline for hours," he said. "Whole system glitched out around midnight. We've been trying to reboot it remotely." I stared at him. "No, that's not possible. I saw him. I heard him." Dave sighed. "You're not the first guard to say that." That stopped me cold. "What do you mean?" I asked. He rubbed the back of his neck. "This place has history. Back when it was still a packing plant, a guy got caught in one of the industrial freezers. Nobody found him until the next day. They say the freezer jammed shut, and he froze standing up." I felt sick. "They shut down this place for almost 20 years after that," he continued. "Every guard we've had on night shift says they hear things, see things. Some won't even walk past the east freezer." I quit that day, but I couldn't let it go. A few weeks later, curiosity got the better of me, and I looked up the plant's history. There it was in a yellowed newspaper clipping from 1961. "Local worker found frozen solid in cold storage incident." The name listed, Raymond Hale. The article said he was trapped overnight after a malfunction sealed the door shut. The photo that accompanied it made my blood run cold. It was him, the same man from the camera, the tilted head, the blank, milky eyes. I've never worked another night shift since, but sometimes when I'm driving past industrial buildings at night, I swear I catch a glimpse of a man in a torn apron standing near the loading dock, his head cocked to one side, watching me. And on cold nights, if I listen close enough, I can still hear the sound of his voice faint through the static of my radio. Cold. Story the end. It was a little past 10:40 p.m. when I parked my car behind the nursing home. The lot was nearly empty, except for a white van that belonged to maintenance and a few older sedans that probably hadn't moved in days. The night air was heavy with mist, and the tall orange security light flickered above me in that way that always made me feel like I was being watched. I grabbed my thermos and walked toward the back door, the soles of my shoes squeaking against the wet asphalt. I'd been working at the Hillview Care Center for 3 months. It wasn't a bad place, at least not at first glance. It was an old brick building with ivy crawling up the sides, built sometime in the 1950s. It smelled like bleach and hand sanitizer, like every other nursing home I'd ever visited. But after dark, the place changed. The halls were too quiet, too still. The old pipes groaned like they were breathing. Sometimes lights in the east wing flickered, even though maintenance said there was nothing wrong with the wiring. I worked the night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., mostly watching over the long-term care residents, those too frail or far gone to ever go home again. The staff was small, usually just me, one nurse, and a janitor who left around 3 a.m. After that, it was just us and 23 residents, most asleep, some wandering. When I pushed open the staff door, the smell hit me, that mix of ammonia, cheap coffee, and something faintly metallic underneath. "Hey, Night Owl," called out Monica, the nurse from the evening shift. She was zipping her jacket and slinging her purse over her shoulder. "You're early for once." "Couldn't sleep," I said, shrugging. "Lucky you. Mrs. Gleason's been screaming about someone standing in her room again. You know how she gets." I nodded, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, the same man she always sees?" "Yup, says he's tall, stands by the window. I checked it out. Nothing there. Again." She sighed, rubbing her temple. She's got dementia, probably mixing up dreams with reality. Still, it's unsettling when she points at the empty window and says he's smiling at her. I laughed softly, but it came out more forced than I wanted. Guess I'll have to go calm her down if she wakes up again. Monica gave me a sympathetic look. "Don't let it get to you. See you in the morning." Once she left, the silence folded in fast. The hum of the fluorescent lights overhead became a constant backdrop. I clocked in, tied my hair back, and started my rounds. The first few hours always went the same. I checked each room, refilled water jugs, and made notes about vitals. Most of the residents were asleep or half asleep, the TV casting pale light over their faces. The building had 2 main wings connected by a dimly lit corridor that always felt colder than the rest. The east wing was older, and that's where I felt most uneasy. I'd heard stories from other aides about strange things in that wing. Doors that opened on their own, call lights that went off in empty rooms, whispering voices through the vents. Everyone brushed it off, said it was just the building settling, bad wiring, or our tired minds playing tricks. But still, the stories lingered. It was around 1:10 a.m. when I first noticed something off. I was restocking gloves at the supply closet when I heard faint footsteps down the hall. Slow, deliberate, like someone dragging their feet slightly. That wasn't unusual by itself. We had a few residents who liked to wander at night, but when I peeked down the corridor, I didn't see anyone. The sound continued, though, echoing softly against the tile floor. "Hello?" I called out quietly. "Mr. Clutt Harris? Is that you?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. I waited a moment, listening. Nothing. The air felt thick, like the humidity had suddenly risen. I rubbed my arms and turned back toward the closet. Then, just as I reached for the gloves, I heard a faint whisper. Not quite a voice, more like breath forming half words. It came from the end of the corridor. I stepped closer, my shoes squeaking. "Who's there?" No response. The light above me flickered once, twice, then steadied. I backed away and decided to make a quick check of the East Wing rooms, just to make sure no one had wandered out of bed. Room 114 was first. Empty. The bed neatly made. Room 115 housed Mrs. Gleason. Her door was cracked open. When I pushed it open, I saw her lying on her back, eyes wide open, staring straight at the window. The blinds were half pulled, and moonlight spilled across her face. Her lips were moving, whispering something I couldn't make out. "Mrs. Gleason?" I said softly. Her head turned toward me so fast I almost jumped. Her eyes, pale, watery blue, locked on mine. "He's here again," she said. "In the corner. He came back." My throat tightened. "There's no one here, Mrs. Gleason." She shook her head violently. "Don't tell me that. He's smiling at you right now. Don't you see him?" I turned, my pulse thudding in my ears. The corner by the window was dark, just a chair and her oxygen machine. Nothing else. "Please, Mrs. Gleason, let's get you comfortable," I said, keeping my voice steady. I adjusted her blanket, avoiding looking at the corner again. Her frail hand grabbed my wrist. Her grip was stronger than I expected. "He only comes when it's quiet," she whispered. "When you stop listening, he moves." I swallowed hard. "Try to get some sleep, okay?" She didn't respond, just kept staring at the window as I backed out of the room. Once I was in the hall again, I took a deep breath. I'd had weird nights before, but something about her eyes unsettled me. They didn't look scared exactly, more like she was resigned, as if she truly expected someone to be there. I wrote a quick note in her chart, then moved on. Around 2:30 a.m., I was sitting at the nurse's station scrolling absently on my phone when I heard the soft click of the front doors. That shouldn't have been possible. The main entrance locked automatically at 10 p.m., and only staff had the keypad code. I looked up. The motion sensor light in the lobby flicked on. I pushed my chair back slowly, listening. The only sound was the whir of the heater. Then, a low, dragging sound, like someone shuffling across the linoleum. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hall. "Hello? Who's there?" The light above the front desk flickered. When I reached the lobby, the glass doors were shut. Through them, I could see the fog outside, thick and still. No one was there. I exhaled, almost laughing at myself. Probably a draft. Maybe the janitor left one of the side doors cracked earlier. But as I turned back toward the nurse's station, something caught my eye. A single wet footprint. It was on the floor just past the lobby entrance, bare, human, and pointing toward the east wing. I froze. The air felt like it had been sucked out of the room. Slowly I followed the prints, one after another, faint smudges of moisture leading down the corridor. They stopped outside room 115, Mrs. Gleason's door. I swallowed hard and knocked gently. "Mrs. Gleason?" No answer. I eased the door open. She was asleep this time, her chest rising and falling in slow, uneven breaths. Her oxygen machine hummed softly. The window blinds were open now, though I was sure I'd left them half closed earlier. I walked over to pull them shut, and that's when I noticed the glass. A handprint. Pressed against the outside of the window, long fingers smudged against the condensation. My heart started pounding. The window was on the second floor. I stared at it for a long time, trying to convince myself it was old, maybe left over from when maintenance had cleaned the windows last week. But the print was fresh, wet, like it had just been made. I stepped back, shut the blinds, and forced myself to breathe. Then I left the room quickly, my hands shaking. The rest of the shift dragged. Every sound, every creak, every rustle made me jump. Around 4 a.m., the janitor came by to empty trash bins, and I almost hugged him out of relief. "You okay?" he asked, looking at me. "You look pale." "Yeah, just tired," I lied. He nodded and went on with his work. I didn't mention the footprints or the window. When morning finally came, the building felt alive again. Voices, movement, the buzz of daylight. I told myself it was just a long night, that maybe the footprints were mine, that Mrs. Mullenhall Gleason's stories were just that, stories. But then, 2 nights later, it happened again. This time, it wasn't just her. It started with the call light flashing in room 118. That room had been empty for 2 weeks. The previous resident had passed away, and they hadn't moved anyone in yet. I figured it was a wiring glitch. But when I went to check, the light was off again. The door, however, was open. Inside, the bed was unmade. I stood there, staring at the sheets. I knew housekeeping had stripped and replaced everything earlier that day. Now it looked like someone had been lying there. The pillow had an indent, and the blanket was pulled halfway down. Something rustled behind me. I spun around, but the hallway was empty. The air grew colder, noticeably colder, like walking into a freezer. My breath came out in faint white wisps. Then I heard it, that same dragging sound. Slow, heavy, coming from the far end of the corridor. I aimed my flashlight, but the beam flickered weakly, cutting through the darkness in shaky pulses. The sound stopped. "Who's there?" I called, my voice trembling. Nothing. Then, faintly, a whisper. Low, breathy. "Don't look at me." I froze. My flashlight went out completely. The corridor plunged into black. I turned and ran, nearly tripping over my own feet, not stopping until I reached the nurse's station. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone trying to call security. When the guard arrived 15 minutes later, he checked every hallway, every door, every window. Nothing. No sign of anyone. "Maybe it's one of your residents wandering," he said. "Room 118 is empty," I replied, my voice hollow. He shrugged. Old buildings make noise. Don't let it get to you. I wanted to believe him. I really did. The next few weeks passed uneventfully. I started keeping my earbuds in during rounds, playing soft music to drown out the silence. But every so often, I caught myself glancing down the East Wing hallway, half expecting to see something move. Then one night in late November, things escalated. It was snowing hard outside. The roads were nearly empty, and most of the staff had called off. That left just me and one nurse, Amanda, who was newer than I was. Around 2 a.m., she came running up to me, eyes wide. "You heard that, right?" she asked. "Heard what?" "The screaming." I blinked. "What's screaming?" "It came from the East Wing. I swear it sounded like someone shouting for help." We both hurried down the hall. The sound had stopped by the time we reached the end, but the air felt wrong. Heavy. Charged. Room 118's door was open again. Amanda hesitated. "Didn't you say this room's empty?" "Yeah," I said quietly. We stepped inside. The bed was made this time. Everything looked normal. But when I turned toward the window, I saw movement, a faint shape reflected in the glass. Someone standing behind me. I spun around. Nothing. The reflection lingered for half a second after I turned, like it hadn't caught up to reality yet. Amanda saw my face and whispered, "We should go." We backed out slowly and shut the door. At the nurse's station, she said, "I'm not imagining that, right? You saw it too?" "I don't know," I said. "I don't know what I saw." That was the night we both started refusing to do rounds alone. 2 nights later, Mrs. Gleason died. It happened just before dawn. I was at her bedside when her breathing slowed, then stopped. Her eyes opened wide one last time, staring toward the corner near the window. Before I could close them, she whispered something. "He's waiting for you." Then she was gone. I didn't sleep that day. After her death, the strange things grew worse. Motion sensors went off in empty hallways. The intercom crackled with static in the middle of the night. Residents complained of cold spots, of feeling watched. The final straw came 3 weeks later. It was almost 3 a.m. when Amanda went to check on a patient in 117. She didn't come back. After 10 minutes, I went looking for her. The hallway was dark. Every other light flickered or buzzed. I called her name. No answer. When I reached 117, the door was open. Inside, the patient was asleep, but Amanda's flashlight lay on the floor, and the far wall, the one facing room 118, had fresh scratches across the paint, deep gouges like fingernails dragged down the surface. Then I heard it, a slow creak from the room next door. 118. The door moved slightly, opening on its own. I should have left. I should have run. But something pulled me forward. I stepped into 118, my heart hammering. The room was dark except for the pale light from the snow outside. The air was icy, and there she was, Amanda, standing by the window, her back to me. "Amanda?" I whispered. She didn't turn. I reached out, touched her shoulder. It was freezing cold. When she turned, her face was pale, eyes wide with terror. She didn't blink. Her lips trembled like she wanted to speak but couldn't. Then behind her, the reflection in the window shifted, tall, thin, with a long grin spreading across where a face should have been. I screamed and yanked her backward. The lights overhead flickered violently, then burst, showering us with tiny sparks. We ran. We didn't stop until we were outside in the snow, our breath coming out in clouds. The security guard found us half an hour later, shaking and crying. They said the stress had gotten to us. They said we imagined it. Amanda quit the next day. I lasted 1 more week before I couldn't take it anymore. Every night I heard footsteps. Every night the East Wing lights flickered. The last time I was there, I walked past room 118 one final time. The door was closed. A new nameplate had been installed for a new resident, but someone had written something in tiny letters on the wood near the handle, carved deep enough to scrape the varnish. "Don't look at him." I never went back after that. A few months later, the facility shut down the East Wing entirely. They said it was for renovations. But when I drove past one night out of curiosity, the windows in that section were all black. No lights, no movement, except one. Room 118's curtain shifted, just slightly like someone had brushed past it. I left and never looked back. Years have passed since then, but I still have dreams. Always the same one. I'm walking down that hallway again. The air is cold, the lights flicker. And from the corner of my eye, I see a tall shadow waiting at the end, smiling. Story the end. It was just past 11 p.m. when I parked my car in the dimly lit lot behind Millbrook Manufacturing. The night air had that sharp, industrial smell, oily, metallic, and faintly bitter. I had been working the night shift there for almost 8 months, mostly alone on the security floor. My usual routine involved checking cameras, walking the long corridors, and occasionally escorting a lone maintenance worker if the need arose. Most nights were quiet. Most nights were predictable. But that night felt wrong the moment I stepped out of my car. The entrance doors hissed open as I pushed them, the automatic sensors groaning as if struggling against the cold. The lobby was empty, fluorescent lights flickering in a slow, almost hypnotic rhythm. I slipped my keycard in and made my way to the security office, trying not to let the eerie silence get under my skin. Inside the office, I booted up the monitors and began my usual scan. The cameras covered the entire factory floor, the shipping docks, the storage areas, and the basement maintenance tunnels. It was the tunnels I had always disliked. They were narrow, low-ceilinged, and lined with pipes that sometimes leaked condensation onto the floor. Some nights I swore the shadows down there moved on their own, but I told myself it was just my imagination. Around 11:30, I noticed something odd on the feed from Tunnel 4. At first, it looked like a flicker, a shadow passing across the camera's view. I leaned closer, squinting. A figure emerged from the darkness at the far end of the tunnel. Tall, thin, wearing what seemed like a dirty jumpsuit, but its movements were jerky, unnatural. The timestamp read 11:31 p.m. I radioed the night supervisor, Tom. "Hey, you seeing this? There's someone in Tunnel 4. That area should be locked." There was a pause. "Check it yourself. Don't go alone if you're spooked." I grabbed my flashlight, feeling a knot tighten in my stomach. I took the long route through the storage wing rather than cutting directly to the tunnels. It was a safer path if something went wrong. As I walked, the air grew colder, heavier, and I could hear the faint hum of machinery in the distance, but nothing else. The deeper I went, the quieter it became, until I could hear only the echo of my boots on the concrete. When I reached the entrance to Tunnel 4, the security lock was intact. I shined my flashlight along the walls, following the beam into the darkness. At first, there was nothing, but then I noticed a shadow move near the far end. I froze. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. The sound echoed unnaturally through the narrow tunnel. Nothing responded. I started down the tunnel slowly, flashlight sweeping side to side. That's when I smelled it, something rotten, metallic, and sharp, like blood mixed with rust. My stomach churned. The figure appeared again, only this time it was closer, though I hadn't seen it move. Its head was tilted to one side, impossibly so, like it had broken its neck but was still alive. Its eyes, if you could call them that, were black, empty pits reflecting the light of my flashlight. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The figure let out a low, guttural sound, a kind of whispering hiss that seemed to come from all around me. I bolted back toward the entrance. That's when I noticed something crawling along the wall, a dark, thin line, moving impossibly fast. I couldn't tell if it was a shadow, a creature, or some kind of hallucination. The line shot past me, and I swear I felt it brush against my arm. I reached the door, fumbled with my keys, and finally unlocked it. I slammed it shut behind me, gasping for air. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold the flashlight steady. I called Tom again, my voice barely audible. "Tom, there's someone in the tunnel. It's not human. Please get security down here." He sighed. "I'll send Jensen and Reggie. Hold tight." I backed into the office and tried to calm myself, staring at the monitors. That's when I saw the cameras flicker and the figure appeared on multiple feeds at the same time. Not walking, not moving, just standing there, staring. In the shipping dock, near the storage area, in the cafeteria. It was everywhere at once, its head cocked unnaturally, its black eyes reflecting the cold fluorescent light. I picked up the radio again. "Tom, it's moving. It's inside the building. It's everywhere." Static. Then Jensen's voice came through, calm but tense. "What's going on? Where is it?" I tried to explain, but words failed me. The monitors began to glitch, static filling each screen and crack, until the entire office was bathed in flickering shadows. Then I heard the faint sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, deliberate, scraping against the concrete floor. I turned. Nothing. But the footsteps continued, getting closer, circling around the office. My flashlight flickered and went out. I ran for the exit, threw open the door, and the hallway was empty. Silence. Too quiet. My chest ached as I ran toward the main floor, heart hammering in my ears. Then I saw it. The figure, standing at the far end of the hallway, head tilted at that same impossible angle, staring directly at me. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The air around it seemed to thrum, vibrating against my skin. I froze. I couldn't breathe. Then it disappeared. I didn't stop running until I was back in the security office. Doors locked, flashlight trembling in my hands. I called Tom one last time. I'm done. I'm leaving. I can't stay here. When morning came, I went back with the day crew to check the tunnels. Everything was normal. No footprints. No evidence anyone had been down there. Just empty concrete, cold and silent. I quit that night. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee what I saw. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory. The way it tilted its head, the way it seemed to be everywhere at once, the way the air itself felt wrong. I've tried to tell people. Some think I'm exaggerating. Some say I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But I know what I saw, and I know it's still there, somewhere in the tunnels, waiting for the next night shift. Story the end? It was a little past 10:30 p.m. when I clocked in for my shift at the Westbrook County Morgue. I'd been working night shifts there for almost 2 years, handling intake paperwork, tagging bodies, and making sure everything stayed in order until the medical examiners came in at dawn. Most people couldn't stomach the job, but I didn't mind the quiet. The pay was decent, and the work was steady. But that night, I learned there's a kind of silence that isn't peaceful at all. It's the kind that feels like it's listening back. The building itself was old, red brick, built sometime in the late 1950s, with a basement-level morgue that always felt colder than it should have been, even with the heating system running. The security lights in the hallway buzzed like angry insects, and every time the generator kicked in, the walls vibrated slightly. I was used to the creaks and mechanical hums of the place. What I wasn't used to was what started happening after midnight that November night. It began with a call from the coroner's office. A body was being transferred from a car accident off I-79, a man in his 40s, pronounced dead at the scene. I was told to expect delivery within the hour. So I went about my routine, sterilized the prep table, logged the last intake, checked the temperature on the freezers, everything normal. At 11:47 p.m., I heard the back delivery door buzzer. 2 paramedics wheeled in the body bag on a stretcher. One of them, a guy I knew named Paul, looked shaken. Bad one? I asked. Yeah, he muttered. Single car rollover. Guy was pinned for hours. Whole thing's just messed up. We moved the body to Station 3. I signed off the intake and they left quickly, clearly eager to get back into the night air. When they were gone, I unzipped the bag partway to verify identity and tag placement. The man's name was Alan Peters, 45 years old. His skin was pale, eyes half open, jaw slack. His arms were twisted unnaturally, and the smell of gasoline clung to him. I tagged the toe, documented his ID, and zipped him back up. Then I slid the gurney into one of the refrigerated drawers and shut the door. That was that, or so I thought. At 12:18 a.m., I was filling out the logbook when I heard a dull thump. It came from the cold storage. I froze. Another thump, louder this time. Sometimes the compressors shifted or the drawers settled, but this sounded different. Rhythmic, heavy, like fists hitting metal. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the back. The sound stopped. For a few seconds, all I could hear was my own breathing and the faint whine of the fluorescent lights. I opened the cold storage room door. The air rushed out, icy, sharp, smelling faintly of formaldehyde. Everything looked normal. Then I saw it. Drawer 3, the one where I'd placed Alan Peters, was slightly ajar. I froze. I hadn't left it open. I was sure of it. I stared for a long time before stepping forward. My gloved hands shook as I grabbed the handle and pushed the drawer back in. It slid smoothly, the metallic click echoing too loud in the stillness. I turned to leave, then heard it again, a scraping sound, coming from inside the drawer. I stopped breathing. The flashlight beam trembled against the tiled floor. I could hear the faintest whisper of movement, like nails dragging against metal. I stepped back, heart pounding, and then the drawer jerked outward. Just a few inches, but enough to make me stumble backward. I bolted from the room and slammed the door shut. Back at my desk, I tried to rationalize it. maybe pressure changes in the refrigeration unit, maybe an air seal issue. That was the logical answer, and I clung to it. But when I sat back down, I noticed something strange on the intake form. Alan Peters had been dead for approximately 6 hours before arrival. But under the notes column, written in shaky penmanship, I didn't recognize were the words, "He's not done yet." I didn't write that. The paramedics didn't write that. My chest went tight. I flipped through the pages to see if I was imagining it, but it was there clear as day. I stared at it until my eyes watered. Around 12:45, Hank, the night janitor, came in to mop the hallway floors. He was a big man in his 60s, friendly, always humming to himself. When he saw my face, he frowned. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said with a chuckle. "Something's wrong with drawer 3, I muttered. "It keeps moving." He raised an eyebrow. "You mean it's opening?" "Yeah, and I heard something from inside it." He sighed, shaking his head. "This place'll do that to you. You hear all kinds of things at night. Pipes, vents, machinery, plays tricks on your mind." He went to check it himself. I followed him reluctantly. When we got to the cold storage, he pushed the door open and walked right in, humming under his breath. Everything looked calm again. Drawer 3 was shut tight. He grinned at me. "See? Nothing to worry." Then the drawer burst open. The metal screeched as the tray slid all the way out, and the body bag rolled halfway open. Hank froze mid-step. My flashlight beam caught the pale face of Alan Peters staring up, his eyes wide open. The worst part wasn't that his eyes were open. It was that his mouth was, too, open wide as if gasping for air. "Jesus Christ," Hank whispered. "You didn't zip him like that, did you?" "No," I croaked. He leaned forward, hand trembling, and zipped the bag back up. The second the zipper reached the top, the lights flickered violently. Then came that sound again, a pounding from inside the drawer, like something trying to get out. We stumbled back. Hank slammed the door shut and locked it. The pounding continued for maybe 30 seconds, echoing through the metal. Then silence. We stared at each other, neither of us speaking. Finally, Hank muttered, "I'm getting the hell out of here." And he did. For a long time, I just stood there, heart racing, too afraid to breathe. Eventually, I convinced myself I had to look again. I had to know. When I unlocked the door and stepped back inside, the drawer was closed again. Perfectly. But on the floor beneath it, faint smudges of moisture like footprints led toward the exit. I couldn't bring myself to open the drawer again. I sat at my desk, staring at the clock, counting down the hours until sunrise. Every sound made me jump. The hum of the AC, the ticking of the wall clock, even the sound of my pen scratching against paper. At around 3:15 a.m., the power flickered and went out. Total darkness. The emergency backup lights failed to come on immediately, which never happened. I sat frozen, waiting. Then from the darkness I heard it, a slow dragging noise. Coming from the hall. It was the sound of something heavy being pulled across the tile floor. I grabbed my flashlight and clicked it on. The beam caught the hallway just in time to see the morgue door swinging open slowly like someone had pushed it. "Hello?" I said, my voice breaking. No answer. The dragging sound stopped. Then, faintly, I heard whispering. A man's voice, breathless, right behind me. "Still not done." I spun around. No one there. The flashlight flickered. For a split second, the reflection in the stainless steel counter showed a man standing behind me. Burnt skin, blackened uniform, twisted arms. Alan Peters. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered to the floor, the beam spinning wildly. By the time I picked it up, the reflection was gone. I ran to the breaker room and flipped the switches manually. The lights came back on. The hallway was empty again. When dawn finally came, I left the morgue without looking back. The next day, I filed a report about a malfunctioning storage unit. No one believed anything else happened. But 2 nights later, the night attendant who replaced me called in sick after his first shift. When they found him the next morning, he was sitting in the cold storage room, staring blankly at drawer 3. On the stainless steel surface of the drawer door, written in condensation, were 3 words, "Still not done." He quit the next day. I never went back. Now, every once in a while, I dream about that basement. I hear the cold hum of the freezers and the faint metallic thump from somewhere deep inside. And sometimes just before I wake up, I hear the whisper again, closer this time. Still not done. Story the end. It was early November when I started my new job at the gas station off Route 19. a small-town pit stop between endless stretches of forest and dark highways. The store was open 24 hours, and they needed someone reliable for the graveyard shift. I was broke between jobs and desperate for steady pay, so I didn't hesitate. I figured it'd be easy money, just a few locals, some truckers, and the occasional drifter passing through. My first few nights were uneventful. The hum of the coolers filled the silence, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the security cameras flickered lazily in the corner. My only company was the sound of wind howling outside the steady tick of the wall clock above the register. It was lonely, sure, but not scary. Not at first. It started on my fifth night. Around 2:45 a.m., a man walked in. I remember him because he didn't make a sound when he entered. No bell, no footsteps, nothing. One second I was restocking cigarettes behind the counter. The next he was standing at the far end of the aisle. He was tall, thin, dressed in a gray jacket that looked damp and dirty, like he'd been walking in the rain. His skin was pale, almost grayish, and his eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They were sunken, glassy, like they didn't quite belong to him. "Pump 3, he said, his voice hoarse. I turned to glance out the window. Pump 3 was empty. No car, no headlights, nothing but the flickering overhead light swaying in the wind. When I turned back, he was gone. Just gone. I stood there for a good minute trying to make sense of it. The security camera above the counter had a small display screen, so I rewound the footage. I could see myself restocking cigarettes, but no one else appeared on the feed. No tall man, no gray jacket, nothing. My stomach dropped. Maybe I was overtired, I thought. Maybe I imagined it. But the faint smell of wet earth lingered where he had stood, and a puddle of water had formed on the tile, as if someone had just stepped in from the rain. The next night I came in uneasy. I kept telling myself it was just the stress of working nights alone. But around the same time, 2:45, I heard the sound of the front door opening. The bell didn't chime. I looked up, and for a second, I saw movement between the aisles, the shadow of a tall figure, just out of view. "Hello?" I called. No answer. I stepped around the counter, heart pounding, and walked down the main aisle. The sound of the coolers seemed to grow louder, their hum filling the silence like static. I turned the corner and saw nothing. But on the floor near the chips rack, a set of wet footprints trailed off toward the back storage room. The back door was locked, as always. I checked it every night, but those prints stopped right at the door, as if whoever made them had simply disappeared into it. I tried to shake it off, but the feeling of being watched became impossible to ignore. Every time I bent down to restock or turned my back to the aisles, I could feel it. Someone standing just behind me, silent, waiting. The security footage kept glitching. Every night around 2:45, the feed would go black for 10 seconds. When it came back, I'd see strange shapes, distorted figures, faces too close to the lens, frozen mid-frame like they were staring straight into the camera. One night, I decided to call my coworker, Kyle, who worked the day shift. I told him what was happening. He laughed at first, said I was letting the night mess with me. Then his tone changed. "Man, you didn't hear about what happened a few years back?" I hadn't. Kyle hesitated. "That gas station used to be different. It was rebuilt after a fire. Some guy came in during a storm one night, looked messed up, lost, kept talking about his car breaking down on the highway. The clerk, a kid about your age, called for help, but by the time the cops showed up, both of them were gone. They found the clerk's body in the woods 3 days later. The other guy? Never found." I didn't want to believe it, but the timeline matched. The storm, the tall man, the gray jacket. That night I almost didn't show up, but I needed the money, and part of me wanted to prove it was just superstition. The shift started normal enough. Midnight passed quietly, the road outside empty. At 2:30, I felt it. The pressure, the electric heaviness that filled the air before something bad happens. The lights flickered. The cooler hum stopped. The building went dead silent. Then came the knocking. It was soft at first, 3 slow knocks on the glass door. I looked up, expecting a customer. No one was there, just the highway stretching into the dark. I walked closer, peering out, breath fogging the glass. Then came another knock, this time on the back door. I froze. No one should be out there. That door led to the alley behind the store, pitch black, surrounded by trees. I backed away, heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo. I turned to grab the phone behind the counter, but before I could dial, the lights flickered back on, and there he was, standing inside, the man in the gray jacket. He stood in the middle of the aisle, head tilted slightly, eyes locked on me. His skin was even paler now, stretched too tight over his face. Water dripped from his sleeves, pooling at his feet. I stumbled back. "You can't be here," I managed to say. He didn't respond, just stared. Then, in that same hoarse voice, he whispered, "Pump 3." And as he said it, I heard it, the faint sound of gas spilling. I turned toward the window, and for the first time, there was a car at Pump 3, old, rusted, its headlights flickering dimly through the rain. But it wasn't turned on. It looked abandoned, coated in grime like it had been there for years. When I turned back to the aisle, the man was gone. The puddle remained. I ran outside, even though my gut screamed not to. The air was cold and wet. I approached the car slowly. The driver's door hung open. Inside, the smell of rot hit me so hard I gagged. On the seat lay a wallet, soaked and torn. I picked it up and opened it. The ID photo showed a man with a gaunt face wearing that same gray jacket. The name read Daniel Harker. The ID had expired in 1997. That was the year the fire had destroyed the old station. I stumbled back toward the store, hands shaking, trying to make sense of it. When I reached the door, I stopped cold. Someone had written something on the glass, words smeared in condensation. "You called for me." I called the cops that night. They showed up around 4 a.m., did a quick sweep, found nothing. The car was gone. No footprints, no puddles, no sign of anyone. They looked at me like I was crazy, took my statement, and left. I quit the job the next morning. But even now, years later, I can still hear that knocking some nights. I'll be sitting in my apartment, lights low, TV humming softly, and I'll hear 3 slow knocks on my window. Always 3. And sometimes, just before I fall asleep, I dream of standing in that gas station again, staring down that long aisle and seeing him there. The man in the gray jacket, watching, waiting. And when I wake, the smell of wet earth lingers in the air. Story the end. It was the fall of 2017 when I took the overnight security job at a warehouse outside Indianapolis. I had just moved to the area, broke and desperate for work. The place was called Monroe Distribution Center, a massive empty complex on the edge of an industrial park that looked deserted even during the day. The listing said, "Easy work, just watch cameras and patrol." It sounded simple enough. I didn't realize what I was signing up for. My shift started at 10 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. I was alone most nights. There was another guard on the rotation, a guy named Rick, who covered the weekends, but we rarely saw each other. The warehouse itself was huge. 3 floors, an office wing, and an older section that wasn't in use anymore. That's the part they told me never to bother checking because it's being renovated. From the first night, the building had a strange atmosphere. It wasn't just the silence, it was the kind of silence that felt heavy, like it was pressing on you. The fluorescent lights buzzed constantly, and the air always smelled faintly of dust and oil. Cameras covered every corner except the old section in the back. That part of the building was dark, unlit, and sealed off by a steel door that had a sign reading, "Restricted, do not enter." For the first week, everything was fine. I'd make my rounds, watch the monitors, and drink enough coffee to stay awake. But by the second week, strange things started happening. It began with sounds, faint noises echoing from the restricted section. I'd hear footsteps when I knew I was the only one inside. Sometimes the motion sensors on the cameras would trigger even though nothing was there. The system would beep, show movement detected, corridor B7, and when I switched to the feed, there'd be nothing but an empty hallway. One night, around 2:30 a.m., I was checking the perimeter when I noticed the door to the restricted section was slightly open. It had been locked tight earlier. I hesitated before walking closer. The air coming from the gap was freezing like a cold draft from a cellar. I grabbed my flashlight, called out, "Hello? Anyone in there?" No answer. I radioed the main office, but there was no response. Static hissed through the line. I told myself it was interference and slowly pushed the door open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing old machinery, dusty pallets, and abandoned shelving units. It looked like nobody had been in there for years. I took a few cautious steps inside. The air felt wrong, thick, heavy, almost wet. My boots crunched on something brittle. When I looked down, I saw shattered glass scattered across the floor, like a dozen light bulbs had exploded at once. I moved further in, sweeping the light around when I heard it, a metallic clang echoing from deeper inside. "Hello," I called again, louder this time. "This area is restricted. You're not supposed to be here." Silence. Then, faintly, a whisper. "Go." I froze. It was so quiet I thought I'd imagined it, but then it came again, clearer this time. "Go." I turned and bolted. I slammed the door shut behind me and threw the latch. My heart was racing, my breath coming in sharp bursts. I went back to the monitors, trying to convince myself I'd heard the wind through the vents. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been standing just beyond my flashlight beam. The next night, I told Rick about it during shift change. He laughed, but not in a dismissive way, more like someone who understood. "You went in there, didn't you?" he said. "They told me not to." "Why? What's back there?" I asked. He hesitated, then shrugged. "I don't know, but they say the building used to be part of an old meatpacking plant. There was an accident back in the 70s, some kind of machinery failure. A couple of workers died. They shut it down for a decade before it reopened as a warehouse." That stuck with me. I tried to brush it off, but after that, things got worse. The sounds grew louder. Clanging metal, shuffling footsteps, faint whispers that echoed through the corridors. Sometimes I'd hear a voice over the intercom calling my name, Eli, in a distorted tone, even though nobody else was there. The first few times it happened, I ran to the control room to check if someone had broken in, but every door was locked, every camera feed empty. Then came the incident that nearly made me quit. It was around 3 a.m. I was doing my rounds when I noticed the lights in the loading bay flickering. As I walked toward them, I saw something on the floor, a set of wet footprints. Bare footprints. They led from the restricted door all the way across the concrete floor. I followed them cautiously, my flashlight shaking in my hand. They stopped near the center of the bay, where there was nothing but open space. And then I heard breathing. It was coming from somewhere above me. Slow, deep breaths. I tilted the flashlight upward, and for a split second, I saw something clinging to the metal rafters, something pale, human-shaped, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, its body thin and contorted. Its face, or what should have been its face, was just smooth skin, no features. The light flickered, and it was gone. I stumbled backward, tripping over a pallet jack. My flashlight hit the ground, and when I picked it up again, the footprints were gone. The floor was dry. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the light steady. I locked myself in the control room for the rest of the night. The next morning, I told the manager what I'd seen. He just gave me this tight smile and said, "You're not the first one to report something strange in that area. But let's not start any rumors, all right? Just stick to the main floors." I tried to quit, but I couldn't afford to. Rent was due, and jobs were scarce. So I stayed, though I never went near that door again. A week later, around 4 a.m., the alarms went off. All the cameras flashed red on the screen. Motion detected. Every single one. I panicked, thinking someone had broken in. I cycled through the feeds, nothing but static. Then one of the screens cleared. It showed the restricted section. There was a figure standing there in the middle of the room. The same thing I'd seen before. Tall, faceless, unmoving. The feed flickered, and suddenly the figure was closer to the camera. Then the screen went black. The entire building went silent. I sat there, frozen, my hands gripping the desk. The power came back on a few minutes later, but the monitors stayed dark. I didn't move until daylight started bleeding through the front windows. When my shift ended, I packed my things and left without telling anyone. I didn't go back for my paycheck. I figured whatever was in that building could keep it. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Rick. His voice was trembling. "Man, something's wrong with this place," he said. Last night, the cameras in the restricted section started working again. There was footage, I swear, it showed you. "Me?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, "but it wasn't you. It was someone wearing your uniform, walking the halls, stopping to look straight at the cameras. Then it went down into the restricted area and didn't come back out." I hung up and blocked his number. I've never been back to Monroe Distribution since. The building's still there, empty now, from what I've heard. Locals say they still see lights flickering in the windows late at night, even though there's no power connected anymore. Sometimes I dream about that warehouse. I see the long hallways, the flickering lights, the dark corners, and every time I wake up freezing, my breath visible in the air. Once I woke to find a wet footprint on my bedroom floor. Just one. I wiped it away, but I couldn't stop shaking because deep down, I knew what it meant. Whatever was in that building never stayed behind. It followed me. Story, the end. It was a little after 10:45 p.m. when I parked my car in the nearly empty lot behind Ridgeway Medical Center. The fluorescent lights over the entrance flickered, their hum steady and low, blending into the restless whir of the air conditioning units along the back wall. I always hated arriving at that time, the world outside already asleep while I was just beginning another 12-hour shift. The hospital stood alone off a 2-lane road in rural Ohio, surrounded by patches of forest and cornfields that in the dark seemed endless. There wasn't another building for miles, and at night, with the main road quiet, the place felt like an island disconnected from the rest of the world. I'd been working night shifts there for almost 3 years. The pay was decent, and the benefits kept me hanging on, but it was wearing me down. Nights at Ridgeway had a certain atmosphere, one that wasn't easy to explain. It wasn't just the fatigue or the silence, it was the sense that something was slightly off. The lights in the corridors buzzed in a way that made my head hurt. There were cold spots in random hallways where the air would suddenly drop 20 degrees. And even though we were a small facility meant mostly for long-term care and emergency overflow, there was this constant feeling that the place was too big for the number of people inside it. Too many rooms, too many empty beds. That night I was scheduled for triage duty and patient monitoring on the second floor. Only 3 of us were working that wing. Me, another nurse named Vanessa, and a security guard named Tom. Tom was in his late 50s, quiet but friendly. Vanessa was younger, about 26, and still new to night shifts. She hated the quiet, always saying the building didn't feel right when the sun went down. I used to laugh it off, but truthfully, I knew exactly what she meant. Around 11:15, I finished my rounds through the main corridor. Most of our patients were stable, elderly post-op recovery, and a few mental health transfers. Room 214 had a man named Gerald who'd been brought in after a car accident, his ribs shattered and leg broken in 2 places. He was heavily medicated, barely awake most nights. Down the hall in 218 was a woman named Elaine, who had early onset dementia and often wandered her room talking to people who weren't there. I remember that night because of how ordinary it seemed at first. The dull routine was comforting. Check vitals, log times, silence the occasional monitor alarm, refill the coffee pot. Outside, a thin rain started tapping against the windows. Around midnight, the power flickered once, twice. It did that sometimes when the wind picked up, but the generators kicked in almost instantly. I didn't think much of it. At 12:30, I went to the nurses' station to start updating charts. The hallway was empty, the sound of rain soft in the background. Tom came by, leaning on the counter, rubbing his jaw like he was thinking. "You hear that?" he asked. I looked up. "Hear what?" He nodded toward the east corridor. "Sounded like someone moving around down there. Thought maybe it was housekeeping, but they're not in tonight, right?" "They're not." I listened. The air vents rattled softly, but there was no distinct sound. "Could be the pipes again," I said. "They make weird noises when the pressure changes." Tom frowned. "Nah, this was heavier. Like footsteps." I shrugged. "I'll check it when I finish this." He hesitated, then gave a small nod and went back toward the security office. A few minutes later, Vanessa came by looking uneasy. "You been down past 220?" she asked. "Not yet. Why?" "There's something weird going on. I heard one of the call bells from that end, but when I went down there, no lights were on. No one was in any of the rooms. It just stopped." I sighed. "It's probably a glitch. Half those systems are older than us." "Still," she said, "it didn't sound right. It was ringing for like 10 seconds and then just off. No one there." She walked away, arms crossed. I could tell she didn't believe it was just a technical issue. I tried to ignore the creeping unease in my gut and went back to work. At 1:04 a.m., the alarm at 214 went off. It startled me, a sharp beeping echoing through the quiet. I jogged down the hall and pushed open Gerald's door. The room was dark, except for the light above his bed. He was lying still, eyes open, staring toward the window. "Mr. Hanley, you okay?" I asked. He turned his head slowly toward me. His eyes were glassy, unfocused. "Do you see him?" he whispered. I froze. "See who?" He blinked hard, then pointed weakly toward the corner by the chair. "That man. He's just standing there." The chair was empty, the corner shadowed, but there was no one there. "There's no one here," I said gently. He shook his head. "He was there a second ago. He said he used to work here." I checked his vitals. Steady, though his blood pressure was a bit high. His medication could have caused confusion, hallucinations even. I reassured him and turned off the alarm, but as I stepped back into the hallway, a chill ran down my arms. His words echoed in my head. He used to work here. When I got back to the nurse's station, Vanessa was staring at the monitors that showed the hallway cameras. "Do you see that?" she asked. I leaned in. The east corridor feed was grainy, washed in green light. But near room 223 there was movement. A dark blur, small and fast, like someone stepping just out of frame. "Could be the camera glitching," I said. "Could be," she replied, her voice tight. "But it looked like someone." We watched for another minute. Nothing. Then suddenly, the image warped. Static filled the screen, then cleared again, the hallway empty. I exhaled. "Okay, that's weird." "I told you," she said. "Something's off tonight." Around 1:30, Tom called from downstairs. "You guys seeing anything on your end?" he asked through the intercom. "Not much," I said. "You?" He paused. "Motion sensors tripped by the loading dock about 5 minutes ago. I checked. Nothing there. Cameras picked up static, same as yours." We all went quiet for a moment. "Let's just keep our eyes open," he said finally. After that, things slowed down again. For about an hour, it was quiet. I tried to convince myself it was just a storm messing with the electronics. But at 2:18, something happened that made it clear it wasn't just that. I was finishing charting when I heard the faintest sound from the hall, a dragging noise, like something heavy being pulled along the floor. I got up, leaned out, and listened. It came again, softer this time, from down near 220. "Vanessa?" I called. No answer. The sound stopped. I walked slowly down the hallway, my shoes squeaking on the waxed tiles. The air felt thicker somehow, humid even though the AC was running. The lights flickered once, twice, then steadied. When I reached room 220, I pushed the door open slightly. The room was empty. It hadn't been used in weeks. The bed was stripped, the curtains open. But the floor, there were faint streak marks, like something had been dragged across it. I stepped inside and looked closer. The marks stopped abruptly at the wall, like whatever made them had vanished. I turned toward the doorway, and for a split second, I swear I saw someone standing just beyond it. Tall, in dark clothing, face obscured. I blinked, and he was gone. My pulse pounded in my ears. I backed out, heart racing, and nearly collided with Vanessa. "Jesus, you scared me," I said. "I was looking for you," she whispered. "Something's wrong with Elaine." "She's up again, talking to someone." I followed her quickly down to 218. Elaine was sitting on the edge of her bed, rocking slightly, her eyes wide and unfocused. "He said he's been walking the halls all night," she muttered. "He said you can't keep him out anymore." "Elaine, there's no one here but us," Vanessa said gently. Elaine shook her head violently. "No, he's here. He used to work here. He said the basement's his now." That phrase again. "Used to work here." I exchanged a look with Vanessa. "Elaine," I said. "What's his name?" She paused, her lips trembling. "Patrick." The air seemed to leave the room. Patrick was a name we all knew, though no one talked about it. 3 years earlier, before I started working at Ridgeway, there'd been a maintenance worker named Patrick Delaney who'd fallen into one of the service shafts during a graveyard shift. It was ruled an accident, though some people whispered that it wasn't. He'd been working alone in the basement when it happened, and no one found his body until the next morning. Vanessa stared at me, her face pale. "Did she just—" "Yeah," I said quietly. "She did." Elaine started crying softly, whispering something over and over that I couldn't make out. I gave her a sedative and stayed with her until she fell asleep. When I finally stepped back into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The faint hum of the air vents had stopped. The building was dead silent. Tom came up the stairs about 10 minutes later, breathing a little heavily. "Power's cutting in and out again," he said. "Generator's steady, but the main line's flickering. You two okay?" Vanessa nodded weakly. I didn't answer. "You ever hear of a guy named Patrick Delaney?" I asked suddenly. Tom froze. "Yeah," Why? Elaine says she's been talking to him. He stared at me for a long moment. That's not funny. I'm not joking. He rubbed his neck. You know they said after that accident, they sealed off the old shaft? That was bullshit. They just put up a gate. There's still an access door in the basement near maintenance storage. Why would they leave it open? Vanessa asked. He shrugged. Cheaper than fixing it right, I guess. The rain had picked up outside, drumming steadily against the windows. Tom said he was going to check the basement, just to be sure nothing was tripping the power. Vanessa begged him to wait until morning, but he said it would only take a few minutes. I didn't like the idea either, but part of me needed to know. We went down together. The elevator creaked as it descended. The basement always smelled damp, metallic, a mix of bleach, mold, and old dust. Our flashlights cut through the dark, beams catching on pipes and forgotten equipment. When we reached the end of the corridor, Tom pointed to a heavy steel door marked Maintenance Access, Restricted. It was secured with a latch and a chain that looked rusted. He frowned. That's weird. What? I asked. The chain's loose. He pushed the door open slightly. A rush of cold air came out, so cold it burned. The smell was awful, like rot mixed with something sharp and chemical. Jesus Christ, Vanessa muttered. The flashlight beams revealed a narrow concrete tunnel leading deeper underground. Puddles shimmered on the floor. I wanted to turn back right then, but Tom stepped inside. Let's make it quick, he said. We followed him reluctantly. The air felt heavy, every breath damp. After maybe 20 yards, the tunnel opened into a small room. Old equipment, pipes, a single hanging light bulb swaying gently even though there was no breeze. And on the far wall, someone had written in what looked like faded red paint, I still work here. Vanessa gasped. Tom. He held up a hand. Hold on. He moved closer, shining his light on the writing. The paint, if it was paint, was crusted, uneven, but fresh enough that it hadn't completely dried. That's not old, he said. The light above us flickered once, then steadied. Behind us, something clanged. Metal on metal, sharp and sudden. Who's there? Tom called out. No response, just the echo of our voices. Then we heard it. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from deeper down the tunnel. Vanessa grabbed my arm. Tom, let's go. He nodded slowly, backing toward the door. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they sounded just around the bend. When they stopped, I swear I could hear breathing, low, raspy, uneven. Tom swung his flashlight toward the sound. For a split second, the beam caught a figure standing at the corner. Tall, wearing what looked like an old maintenance uniform, face hidden in shadow. The reflective strip on the uniform gleamed faintly. Then the light flickered, and he was gone. Tom slammed the door shut, wrapping the chain around it as fast as he could. None of us said a word until we were back upstairs. We tried to go back to normal, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Every hallway felt darker. The sound of the rain turned into a kind of static against the windows. I could feel eyes on me wherever I walked. At 4:12 a.m., one of the motion alarms triggered again, East Corridor. Tom went to check. Vanessa refused to leave the nurse's station, saying she felt sick. A few minutes later, I heard the intercom crackle. Something's wrong, Tom's voice said, faint, distorted. Tom? I answered. Static. Then faintly, he's down here. The line went dead. I ran toward the corridor, flashlight in hand. The hallway lights flickered violently, buzzing like angry insects. When I reached the end of the corridor, Tom's flashlight was lying on the floor, the beam pointed at the wall. The air was freezing, so cold I could see my breath. Tom, I yelled. No answer. I looked down the hall and saw the door to the basement stairwell slightly ajar. Inside, it was pitch black. I took one step forward and heard whispering. Not clear words, just murmurs like several people speaking all at once from far away. Then, from the bottom of the stairs, a single voice, harsh, breathless. Why'd you lock me in? My heart nearly stopped. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the doorway. The whispering grew louder, closer, until it was right beside my ear. Vanessa screamed from down the hall. I turned and ran. When I reached her, she was standing at the monitors, crying. He's on the camera, she said. I looked. The feed from the basement stairwell showed the figure standing motionless at the bottom, head tilted up toward the camera. The image glitched, static rippling across the screen, but I could make out the shape, the uniform, the boots, the pale skin. The timestamp flickered and froze. Then in one blink, he was gone. The rest of the shift passed in a haze. Tom never came back up. When the day crew arrived at 6:45, they found him unconscious by the basement door. He was breathing, but his pulse was weak. When he woke up later, he said he didn't remember anything, just a flash of light and a voice calling his name. Maintenance checked the basement again later that week. The access door had been welded shut, permanently this time. They claimed there was no writing on the wall, no sign anyone had been down there in years. But a few nights later, I came in early for my shift and found something waiting on the nurse's station counter. A rusted maintenance badge. The name on it read P. Delaney. No one knew how it got there. Vanessa quit the next day. Tom transferred to another site within the month. I stayed for another 3 weeks, but every night I heard the same dragging sound from the empty rooms at the end of the hall. On my last night, just before I left for good, I walked one last round through the second floor. The rain had started again. Everything was still. When I passed room 220, I stopped. The door was cracked open. Inside, faintly illuminated by the hallway light, there was a man sitting in the chair by the wall. He wore a gray maintenance uniform. His head was tilted slightly, eyes fixed on me. I couldn't move. After a few seconds, the light flickered, and the chair was empty. I left my badge on the counter that night and never went back. A few months later, the hospital closed for renovations. It's still empty, as far as I know. Locals say sometimes at night, if you drive by, you can see a single light on in the east corridor, even though the power's been cut for years. Some nights, I still dream about that place. I'll be walking those same hallways, hearing that same dragging sound. And just before I wake up, I always hear a voice behind me whisper, "I still work here." Story the end. It was the kind of night that made the city feel empty, even though I knew 100,000 people were still awake somewhere out there. I was working my usual night shift at Mercy Memorial Hospital, a place I had come to both respect and quietly fear over the years. Night shifts had a rhythm, a strange lull, punctuated by the occasional beep of a monitor or the shuffle of a nurse's shoes on linoleum. But that night, the rhythm felt broken from the moment I clocked in. I was assigned to the East Wing, which housed long-term patients, mostly elderly folks with chronic illnesses, some in hospice care. Around midnight, I was checking vitals when I noticed the hallway was unusually silent. No intercom chatter, no distant echo of a wheelchair. I thought that was strange, but I shrugged it off. That is, until I reached room 412. The patient in 412, an older man named Harold, had been in and out of consciousness all day. But as I approached, I saw him sitting upright in bed, staring straight at me, completely still. "Harold?" I asked, my voice a little tighter than I intended. No response. I leaned closer, noticing his eyes. They weren't focused on me. They seemed to be staring past me, through the wall, through the entire room. Before I could speak again, I felt a cold draft brush my neck, even though the window was closed and the AC was off. Then I heard it. A faint whisper, light, almost drowned by the hum of the hospital, calling my name. "Lisa." I froze. My name. Nobody else was on this floor. I spun around, but the hall was empty, the fluorescent lights flickering intermittently above me. Shaking, I pressed the call button for backup, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, just silence. I told myself it was fatigue. Night shifts do weird things to your brain. But when I stepped into the hallway to get some water, I noticed the shadows were different. They weren't tied to the shapes of furniture or the columns. They moved independently, stretching and twisting along the walls as if alive. I started my rounds faster, checking on patients who, thankfully, were asleep. Then I reached room 419. A young woman recovering from surgery was supposed to be resting, but her bed was empty. Her wheelchair sat in the corner, tipped over. I called out. No response. The monitor for her vitals showed a flat line for 2 seconds before returning to normal. I rushed in to check the room, but she was nowhere to be found. I ran down to the nurse's station to call security. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely dial. That's when I saw it, a figure, tall and dark, standing at the end of the hall, faceless, perfectly still, watching me. I blinked, and it was gone. The night dragged on. Every time I turned a corner, I felt something behind me, just beyond my line of sight. Doors slammed shut on their own. Monitors beeped in sequence, echoing down empty hallways. I could hear whispers, low, urgent, repeating names of patients who weren't even awake. Once, I looked into room 423 and saw the shadow of a man standing over a bed, but when I stepped closer, the room was empty. By 3:30 a.m., I had seen enough to know I wasn't imagining it. I called the night supervisor, who tried to calm me down, saying it was probably a draft or fatigue, but she didn't sound convincing. Even she seemed uneasy. Then came the moment I'll never forget. I was checking the last room on the east wing, room 427, a hospice patient nearing the end. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp. As I stepped inside, I saw the bed was empty. My stomach dropped. The heart monitor showed a normal reading, but the patient was gone. That's when I heard it, footsteps approaching from behind me, slow, deliberate, soft against the tile floor. I whipped around. The hallway was empty. I backed toward the door, my flashlight trembling in my hand. That's when I saw the figure again. Taller than any human should be, faceless, shrouded in shadow. It didn't move toward me, didn't make a sound, but I could feel its gaze burning into me. I stumbled out into the hallway and slammed the door behind me. I ran to the stairwell, hoping to find someone, anyone. The hospital seemed alive now, whispering and shifting. Doors that should have been closed were ajar, shadows moving inside them. I heard crying, faint and distant. Children I knew weren't there. I climbed to the second floor, thinking maybe the wing would be safer. It wasn't. There, the walls seemed to breathe, faint figures appearing and disappearing just at the edge of my vision. By the time dawn broke, I was shaking, sweating, my heart racing. I reported everything to administration, but no one took me seriously. Patients were found missing or moved by accident, and the security footage, once again, showed nothing. The cameras that should have captured the faceless figure had blacked out during the peak of the activity. I quit that night. I couldn't return. But even now, years later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear whispers calling my name. And when I close my eyes, I see the shadowy figures, faceless, patient, always watching. I've tried to tell people, but they laugh it off as stress, night shift, paranoia. They don't understand that the hospital is different at night. The air feels heavier, the shadows wait, and if you're unlucky, they take notice of you. I never work nights again, and I never will. But I can't stop thinking about the people who didn't make it out, the patients who disappeared without a trace, and the faceless figures standing silently, waiting in the darkness. Mercy Memorial doesn't care if you see it or not, it just waits. Story, the end. It started with the kind of quiet that makes every sound sharper than it should be. The hum of fluorescent lights, the occasional clatter of a cart down the hallway, the soft beeping of machines in rooms that were otherwise empty. All of it felt louder than it had any right to. I had taken the night shift at a small hospital in the Midwest, mostly because I needed the hours to pay rent and because the manager said I was reliable and calm under pressure, which honestly just meant I didn't panic easily, or so I thought. My first night was mostly uneventful, save for the usual awkwardness of the night crew. The night shift attracts a mix of people. Some college students who want the extra cash, some older folks who are just trying to get by, and the occasional burned-out nurse who looks like they've seen things you don't want to imagine. I fell into the latter category. Well, almost. I was new, green, and eager to prove I could handle it. That first night, I didn't even notice the weirdness creeping in. It was a Tuesday. Quiet. The hospital itself was old, a brick building from the 1960s that smelled faintly of disinfectant and mildew. The layout was confusing. Hallways twisted like a maze, rooms numbered in ways that made no sense, elevators that sometimes opened on floors that didn't exist, or at least shouldn't have existed. The kind of building that feels alive, almost breathing, if you let your imagination run too far. I was walking back from the supply room when I noticed it. The shadows didn't move right, not like they should. A flicker in the corner of my vision, just for a second, but enough to make me pause. I chalked it up to exhaustion. Night shifts will do that to you. Your mind plays tricks when you're alone in dimly lit corridors at 3 a.m. I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't. That shadow seemed to follow me, though every time I turned, there was nothing there. By my second week, the hospital felt different. I'd grown used to the night crew's small routines. The constant check-ins, the whispers about things that happened in rooms I wasn't supposed to enter, The old janitor who never spoke unless he had to and always looked like he knew more than he let on. People warned me about staying too long in the empty wards. The night has a way of showing you things, one of the nurses said. I laughed it off. I had a rational mind, I thought, not prone to superstition. Then I started hearing it. The first time it was a soft thud, almost like someone dropped a book. I was in the ICU, checking vitals, when the sound came from the hallway. I looked up, empty. No carts, no staff, no patients wandering around, just silence and the faint buzz of the lights. I told myself it was the building settling, old pipes, maybe even rats. But then it happened again and again. Each time it felt closer, louder, more deliberate. One night I was walking to the nurse's station after checking on a patient in room 214. I passed the old wing of the hospital, the part no one used anymore. The lights there were flickering, the kind of fluorescent flicker that makes your eyes ache if you stare too long. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging, deliberate, echoing in the empty corridor. I froze. My heartbeat spiked. "Hello?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer. Just the sound of those footsteps moving toward me, then stopping. I told myself it had to be another staff member, but that didn't make sense. I knew everyone who was on shift. The hallway was supposed to be empty. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes fixed on the dark end of the corridor. The air felt colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones. And then I saw it. A figure, hunched, shrouded in shadow. Not a patient, not a staff member, just there, watching me. I ran. Down the hall, around the corner, to the nurse's station. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't hold my clipboard straight. The night supervisor looked up from her paperwork. "Everything okay?" she asked, calm as ever. "Yes, I think I saw someone," I stammered. She didn't even look up. "It's just the night shift messing with your head. You'll get used to it." I didn't feel reassured. The weeks went on, and the incidents increased. Objects moved, not dramatically, not like in the movies, but subtly. Charts I'd left on a counter would be in a different order. Doors I'd closed were slightly ajar. Monitors would beep for no reason. Occasionally I'd hear a whisper, indistinct, almost like someone muttering behind a door. Always behind doors. Never in the open. One night, I was charting in the nurse's station when I noticed something on the security monitors. The camera feed from the old wing showed a man walking. Or maybe a man. It was hard to tell. He wore a dark coat, hat pulled low, and moved unnaturally slow. He passed through walls, or at least through places he shouldn't have been able to. At first, I thought it was a glitch. Then he turned and looked at the camera. Directly at it. Directly at me. I yelped. My fingers froze over the keyboard. I showed the footage to the night supervisor. "That's just an old reflection, probably a trick of the monitor," she said, dismissing it. But she didn't sound convincing. I could see it in her eyes. She had seen it too. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down everything that happened. The strange sounds, the moving objects, the whispers. Every night, the incidents became more aggressive. The shadow figures got bolder. I began seeing them in peripheral vision constantly. Once I walked into a patient room and the bed was shaking. Alone, no machinery involved. One night, I stayed late, waiting for the early morning shift. I was alone in the ICU, finishing paperwork. The silence was suffocating. Then, I heard it, laughing. Low, guttural, almost a growl, coming from the corner of the room. I froze. The laughter stopped when I turned, but the feeling of being watched remained. I decided I had to confront it, not in a physical sense, just to see it, to understand it. I walked down the hall to the old wing, the one where the lights flickered and the air smelled of mildew and mold. The temperature dropped as I approached, my breath fogged in front of me. And then I saw him, the man from the security footage, standing at the end of the hall, motionless, waiting. I tried to speak. "Who are you?" Nothing. Just the emptiness of the corridor. I took a step forward. He didn't move. Another step. Then he was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no echo, nothing. But the smell hit me then, a mix of rot and smoke. It lingered in the back of my throat and made me gag. I ran back to the nurse's station and called the day supervisor. I wanted answers. I wanted someone to acknowledge what was happening. No one would. "The night shift gets to people," they said. "You're just tired. Go home." But I wasn't tired. I was terrified. The breaking point came one night in the pediatric wing. I was checking on a sleeping child when I heard the softest whisper behind me. "Help me." I turned. Empty room. The crib was rocking slightly, though I hadn't touched it. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering. That's when I noticed the walls. Scratches, almost like someone had clawed at them. Fresh, deep, and the whispers got louder, more desperate. Help me, help me. I ran to the nurse's station and told the night supervisor. She finally looked alarmed. Not at me, but at something else. She grabbed a set of keys, muttered something under her breath, and went into the old wing. I waited. Minutes passed. I couldn't hear anything but my own breathing. Then she came back, pale, shaking. She didn't say a word, just wrote something on a piece of paper and handed it to me. Document everything and never go into that wing alone. I didn't, but the nights became unbearable. The whispers turned into voices, crying, screaming. I'd see shadows moving just beyond the corner of my eye. Doors would slam in empty corridors. Once a cart barreled past me on its own, clanging into the wall. One night it escalated to violence. I was alone in the ICU charting when a patient monitor went haywire. Alarms blaring, red lights flashing. I ran to the room and the patient, an elderly man, was gone. Bed empty. No heart rate, nothing. I panicked. I ran to the nurse's station. My radio crackled, and for a split second, I heard the man's voice. My voice. He's here. I dropped the radio. The lights flickered. The shadow appeared at the end of the hallway, taller, wider, moving impossibly fast. I ran for the stairs, hearing footsteps behind me, though no one was there. I don't know how I made it out. Somehow, I left the building before dawn, not looking back. I quit the next day, tried to forget, but the nightmares followed me. Shadows moving at the edge of my vision, whispers in empty rooms, the feeling of being watched. I've tried therapy, medications, logic, everything. Nothing works. I can still hear the hospital at night, even when I'm miles away. People ask why I won't return, why I don't just shake it off. I can't explain it rationally. All I know is that whatever I saw, whatever I experienced, was real. The night shift is not just quiet, it's alive. Watching, waiting, and once it notices you, it doesn't let go. I haven't worked nights since. I haven't returned to hospitals. But sometimes when the lights flicker just right, I can see it in the corner of my apartment. A shadow too tall, too still, and always waiting. And I know deep down it's only a matter of time before it comes for me again. Story the end. The night I started working at the gas station off Route 14, I thought I'd found the easiest job in the world. Just 8 hours alone, ringing up a few late-night customers, restocking shelves, and keeping the place tidy. The pay wasn't great, but the hours fit my schedule, and the manager, Carl, promised me the night shift was quiet. He was right about that, too right. My first shift was uneventful. A few truckers, some drunk college kids buying cigarettes, and the occasional cop passing through. The hum of the coolers and the soft buzz of the fluorescent lights filled the silence. After 2 a.m., it was like the world outside disappeared. The parking lot was swallowed in darkness, broken only by the harsh white light of the overhead lamps and the faint glow from the neon open sign. I worked 3 nights straight without issue, but on the 4th night something felt off from the moment I clocked in. The air inside the store felt heavier somehow, as if the temperature had dropped even though the thermostat said 72. The smell of motor oil and burnt coffee hung thick in the air, and when I looked out the front windows, the darkness outside seemed thicker than usual, like it had a texture. Around midnight, a man came in, tall, wearing an old brown trench coat that looked soaked even though it hadn't rained in days. His face was shadowed under a hat, and he didn't say a word when I greeted him. He just shuffled to the back of the store toward the refrigerated beer section. I heard the glass door open, then close, but he never came back up to the counter. "Sir?" I called out after a few minutes, trying to sound casual. No response. I left the register and walked toward the back. The cooler door was still swinging slightly, as if it had just been opened. The man was gone. I checked each aisle, even the bathroom. Nothing. It was impossible. There was only one way in or out, and the bell above the door never rang. I tried to shake it off, convincing myself I'd just been tired, maybe seeing things. But when I walked back to the counter, I noticed the condensation on the counter near the register, drips of water in the shape of wet footprints. They led from the counter to the exit, disappearing at the door. I didn't mention it to Carl the next day. He was the kind of guy who would have told me to stop spooking myself. But when I came in the next night, he gave me a strange look. "You're working alone tonight?" he asked. I told him I always did. He hesitated, then said, "Keep the back door locked, all right? Just keep it locked." That night, I double-checked all the locks before I started. The hum of the coolers was the only sound. I was restocking the chips when I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, coming from the back hallway that led to the storage room. My first thought was that Carl might have come by unannounced, but when I called out, no one answered. The footsteps stopped. I walked to the end of the aisle and shined my phone flashlight toward the back. Nothing. Just the metal door leading outside. I turned to head back to the counter when I saw a movement in the reflection of the cooler glass. A shadow, tall and thin, standing just behind me. I spun around. Empty. My heart was pounding now, and I could feel sweat bead at my temples despite the chill. I locked the back door again, then went back to the counter and tried to distract myself by counting the register. I just started when the lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the entire store went dark. The hum of the coolers died, and silence swallowed the room. My flashlight cast a narrow beam across the shelves, catching glimpses of potato chips, soda cans, and empty aisles. Then I heard breathing, low, rasping, coming from somewhere near the front windows. I froze, holding my breath. My flashlight beam trembled in my shaking hand as I swept it across the store. The sound grew louder, closer. "Who's there?" I shouted, though my voice cracked halfway through. No answer, just that wet, uneven breathing. I backed slowly toward the counter, grabbing the phone. The line was dead, not even static. Then, from the darkness, I heard my name. Not whispered, spoken in a low, guttural voice that didn't sound human. "Ryan." My knees went weak. The beam from my flashlight hit the front door, and for a split second, I saw a reflection in the glass. Something tall, with a distorted face, skin hanging loose like it had melted. Its eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. Then the reflection vanished. The lights snapped back on. Everything looked normal again. The hum of the coolers returned. The clock on the wall said 2:47 a.m. I felt dizzy, like I'd lost time. I checked the security cameras behind the counter, expecting to see the man or something, anything, but every screen showed static, except one. The back hallway feed showed me standing there, frozen, staring into the darkness. But behind me, in that grainy footage, a tall, shadowy figure was standing. I felt sick. I didn't sleep that day. When I came in for my next shift, I told Carl what had happened. He just sighed. "You're not the first to see something like that," he said quietly. "We've had 3 night guys before you. None lasted more than a week." "What happened to them?" I asked. Carl hesitated, then said, "One stopped showing up. Another quit mid-shift, just walked out and left the lights on. The last one." He trailed off, looking at the floor. "They found his car on the side of the highway, door wide open, engine still running. He never came back. I should have quit right then, but something in me needed to know what was happening. Curiosity mixed with fear until I couldn't tell them apart. That night, I brought a small camera with me, one of those cheap body cams you clip to your shirt. I figured if anything happened again, I'd have proof. I started recording as soon as I clocked in. For the first couple of hours, everything was normal. A couple of truckers came through, bought snacks, and left. At 2:10 a.m., the power flickered again. The coolers stopped. The silence fell. Then I heard it. A faint scratching sound from the back hallway, slow, rhythmic, like nails dragging across metal. I gripped the flashlight, walked slowly toward the sound, every step echoing louder than it should have. The scratching stopped as I reached the storage door. My hand shook as I turned the knob. The door swung open with a loud creak, revealing rows of shelves stacked with boxes. At first, I didn't see anything. Then from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure crouched behind a stack of boxes, facing the wall. It was tall and thin, shoulders hunched, wearing that same brown trench coat. "Sir?" I croaked out. It turned its head toward me. Slowly, too slowly. The face that stared back wasn't right. The skin looked wet, sagging like it was slipping off the bone. The eyes were black holes. It smiled, a slow stretch of torn lips revealing teeth that looked too long, too sharp. I stumbled backward and slammed the door shut. Something on the other side slammed into it with enough force to rattle the hinges. I fell against the floor, breathing hard, watching as the door bulged inward, the metal creaking. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped. Silence. I scrambled to my feet, sprinted for the front counter, and dialed 911. The call went through this time, but all I could hear was static. Then, beneath the static, the same voice whispered, "Ryan." I dropped the phone. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, but it wouldn't budge. Locked. I turned the key, slammed against it. It was like something on the other side was holding it shut. My reflection in the glass shifted. Behind me, in that reflection, stood the figure again, smiling. I turned around. Nothing. I don't remember how I got out. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in my car on the side of the road, engine running, hands gripping the steering wheel. The sun was rising. The gas station was behind me in the rearview mirror, and for a brief second I thought I saw someone standing in the window, watching me. I quit that morning. Carl didn't even look surprised when I handed him my keys. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I figured you wouldn't last long. I asked him why he kept the place open if this kept happening." He looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's not the place. It's the night. You stay here long enough, you start to see what doesn't belong." I tried to forget. I deleted the body cam footage, but part of me wishes I hadn't, because now when I drive past that gas station at night, I still see it sometimes, through the window, standing behind the counter where I used to work, watching, waiting. Story the end. It was the middle of January and the kind of cold that gets into your bones and stays there. I was working the night shift at a small private hospital in southern Illinois. The building was old, built in the early 1950s, and despite renovations, it had that constant smell of antiseptic mixed with something stale, maybe mildew or the ghosts of 1,000 stale cups of coffee. I'd taken the job because I needed it badly. My ex-wife had taken most of what I had during the divorce, and night work meant extra pay and fewer people to deal with. I worked as a security guard, though that title sounded a lot more official than it really was. My job was mostly walking the halls, checking that the doors were locked, making sure patients didn't wander off, and sometimes helping the nurses calm down someone confused or aggressive. It was boring 90% of the time, and the other 10% was just mildly stressful until that night. The hospital had 3 main floors, plus a basement that held old storage rooms, an outdated morgue, and maintenance equipment. The basement creeped everyone out, not because of ghosts or anything, or so I thought, but because it was freezing cold and smelled of damp concrete and disinfectant. There was a hum down there that you could feel more than hear, from the ancient ventilation system that ran through the walls. The only time I had to go down there was to check the boiler room or help maintenance move supplies. That night started like any other. I got to the hospital at 10:45 p.m., nodded to the nurse on duty, a middle-aged woman named Carla, and signed into the security log. There were only 12 patients in the hospital that night. It wasn't a big place, and the staff was down to a skeleton crew. The overnight nurses' station on the second floor had 2 people, one cleaner making rounds, and me. I always started with a slow walk through the main lobby, checked that the doors were locked, then moved down the halls. At around midnight, I was sitting in the security office, drinking coffee and watching the monitors. Most of the cameras showed empty hallways lit by dim fluorescent lights. You could see the occasional flicker, the way those lights tend to do, and the reflection of the tiles shining like wet pavement. The cameras for the basement were grainy and gray, and the timestamp on one of them lagged behind by a few seconds. Maintenance had promised to fix it for months, but never did. I was half dozing when I noticed something on the basement feed. At first, I thought it was just static or the motion of shadows, but then I saw it again. A figure walking slowly through the corridor near the old morgue door. It was hard to make out any details, but it looked like a person. The problem was, no one was supposed to be down there. I stared at the screen, leaning closer. The figure moved with this strange shuffle, almost dragging one foot. I thought maybe it was one of the janitors, though they usually stayed on the main floors. I grabbed my flashlight, clipped my radio to my vest, and headed for the elevator. When I got to the basement, the air hit me like a wall. It was so much colder down there, almost bitter, and smelled metallic. The fluorescent lights flickered as I stepped into the hall, and I called out, "Maintenance? Anyone down here?" My voice echoed. Nothing. I walked down toward the morgue area, boots echoing against the concrete. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, and I could hear the faint whine of the old air system. I turned the corner, and that's when I heard it. The soft scrape of something against the floor, like a shoe being dragged. "Hello?" I called again, more loudly. There was a pause, then another slow drag. I swung my flashlight beam toward the sound, but there was nothing there, just the long stretch of hallway leading to the storage rooms. I moved closer, my heart thudding harder than I wanted to admit. When I got near the morgue door, I noticed something odd. The heavy steel door was slightly open, maybe an inch or two. That door always stayed shut unless someone had reason to go in. It creaked when you moved it, heavy and stiff with age. I hesitated before pushing it open the rest of the way. The light inside flickered on from a motion sensor, and the cold got even worse. The morgue hadn't been used in years. Now it mostly stored old equipment and expired supplies waiting for disposal. The stainless steel autopsy tables were still there, though, covered in sheets of plastic. The smell was faintly chemical, mixed with something old and unpleasant, like damp fabric that had never quite dried. I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight beam across the room. Something caught my attention, a shape near the back of the room beside one of the tables. I froze, breath misting in the cold. It was a person, standing very still. I called out, "Sir, you're not supposed to be down here." The figure didn't move. I took a step closer, and the light fell across them. It was a man in a hospital gown, barely pale, with his head tilted slightly to one side. I recognized him immediately, though my brain refused to believe it at first. It was one of the patients who'd 2 nights ago. His name had been Alan Weaver. He was an older man, mid-70s, admitted for heart failure. I'd seen the nurses rush around his room when the alarms went off that night. I even helped hold the door open as they moved the crash cart in. He hadn't made it. I knew for a fact his body had been moved out. But there he was, standing in the dim morgue light, eyes open, face blank. For a second, I thought it was a trick. Maybe someone was screwing with me, or maybe I was seeing things. My voice caught in my throat as I took a step closer. "Mr. Weaver?" The man didn't answer. Then, with a slow, jerky motion, he turned his head toward me. His eyes were cloudy, unfocused. His lips moved like he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I stepped back instinctively, my flashlight trembling. "Sir, you need to." The words died as he took one slow step forward. His bare foot scraped the floor. The sound of that dragging step matched what I'd heard earlier. I backed out of the room and slammed the door shut. The sound echoed down the hall. My heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear. I ran back toward the elevator, radioing Carla. "Carla, it's Tyler. I need you to check the patient records. Alan Weaver, room 214, he's still listed as deceased, right?" There was silence for a few seconds, then her confused voice came through. "Yeah, he passed Tuesday." I didn't answer. I didn't know how to. I just rode the elevator up and locked myself in the security office, staring at the monitors again. When I switched the camera feed back to the basement, the hallway was empty. The morgue door was closed. I told myself maybe it was a hallucination, or I'd seen a reflection, or maybe my brain was tired. I didn't sleep much those days, maybe 4 hours a night if I was lucky. But no matter how much I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake that image of him standing there, silent and pale under the buzzing light. The next night, I told myself it was over. I came in as usual, and things seemed normal. But just after 1 a.m., Carla called me on the radio. Her voice was shaky. "Tyler, someone's in room 214. I froze. "What do you mean? Someone's in there?" "That room's been closed since Mr. Weaver passed, but the sensor light turned on, and I heard something moving." I headed up immediately. The hallway on the second floor was dim and quiet. When I got to room 214, the door was slightly open. The light inside was on, flickering. I pushed the door open with my flashlight ready. The bed was empty. The sheets were messy, like someone had sat or lain on them. The smell in the room was faintly metallic again, not blood exactly, but close. I turned toward the bathroom door. It was half closed, and I could see movement. The slow shadow of feet under the door. "Hello?" I said carefully. "You need to come out." No response. I reached for the door handle, but before I could touch it, it creaked open on its own. The bathroom was empty, except for one thing. Wet footprints on the tile, leading from the shower toward the door. bare footprints, like someone had stepped out of the shower and walked straight into the room. They stopped right where I was standing, then faded. That was when I started to think something was very wrong with that building. Over the next week, small things started happening. The elevator would stop between floors for no reason. The intercom would crackle with faint static, and sometimes, just barely, you could hear someone whispering a name. The basement motion sensors would trip randomly, and once I found a gurney sitting in the middle of the hall when it had been locked away earlier. Carla admitted she'd been hearing things too. A soft voice calling her name when no one was around. Footsteps in the empty stairwell. The cleaner said he quit after finding a light turned on in the morgue, and the switch was too high for him to reach without a ladder. The night it all came to a head, I was working alone. A snowstorm had hit earlier that evening, and the roads were a mess, so we were down to minimal staff. Carla had left at 11 after a double shift, and I was supposed to stay until 7 a.m. Around 2:30, the power flickered. Not out completely, but enough to dim the lights and make the monitors glitch. I tapped the screen, and for a second, all the cameras showed static. Then they came back one by one, all except the basement feed. I switched the controls to reset it, but the image that came through made my blood go cold. There were 5 people standing in the hallway, all wearing hospital gowns, all barefoot. They were standing perfectly still, lined up like they were waiting for something. Their faces were blurry on the grainy feed, but their posture, stiff and unnatural, made my stomach drop. I leaned closer, heart hammering. One of them turned slightly, and I could see the side of his face. It was Alan Weaver, and beside him were 2 other patients I knew had died that month. My hand shook so hard I almost dropped the radio. I was trying to think, to rationalize, to do anything, when the lights in the office flickered again. I looked up. The door to the hallway was open. I was sure I'd closed it. Then, very faintly, I heard it. The sound of dragging footsteps coming down the hall outside. Slow, uneven, closer. I didn't move. The sound stopped right outside the door. I waited, barely breathing, and then the air in the room grew suddenly cold. That same bitter chill from the basement. The lights flickered again, and for a split second, I saw a shape standing in the doorway. When the lights came back on, it was gone. That was it for me. I called my supervisor, said there was a power issue, and I was locking down the building. I left everything as it was and went outside into the snow, breathing hard, my hands trembling so badly I could barely start my car. I never went back. A month later, the hospital shut down entirely. The official reason was structural safety issues and funding loss. But I heard from a former nurse that more things had happened in those last few weeks. Patients seeing figures in their rooms at night, machines turning on by themselves, whispers in the vents. She told me quietly that sometimes when they did night checks, they'd find beds messed up in the closed-off wing, like someone had been sleeping there. No one ever found out what really caused it. But I still dream about that basement sometimes, about those figures lined up in the hall, waiting. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, I swear I can still hear that slow, dragging step echoing somewhere just beyond the walls. Story the end. It was the kind of job most people didn't last long in. The pay wasn't bad, but the hours were miserable, and the isolation could eat away at you. I worked the night shift at a small 24-hour gas station in rural Indiana, about a half hour outside Fort Wayne. It sat on a lonely stretch of Route 33, mostly truckers, a few drunks from the nearby town, and the occasional couple passing through. My shift ran from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., and for the most part, I was alone. The manager came in at 6 sharp, and I'd clock out, drive home, and sleep through most of the day. The place was old, flickering fluorescent lights, warped linoleum floors, and one of those ancient security systems where you could barely make out shapes on the monitor. There were 6 cameras in total. 1 pointed at the pumps, 1 by the front door, 2 covering the aisles, 1 behind the counter, and 1 out back near the dumpsters. The routine was simple. Keep the coffee fresh, restock the snacks, handle customers, mop the floors, and make sure the pumps stayed running. Nothing to it, really. The scariest thing before that night had been the occasional tweaker yelling at his reflection in the freezer glass. That night started out normal. It was early November, cold enough that the windows fogged on the inside. I got in just before 10, made a fresh pot of coffee, and took over from Brenda, the evening shift lady. She was nice but tired, always reeking of cigarette smoke and hairspray. "Quiet night," she said, slipping into her coat. "Just that guy from the trucking company came in around 9. Bought a sandwich and a Red Bull. Haven't seen anyone since." "Good," I said. "I'll take a quiet night." She laughed, shook her head, and said, Don't say that. Quiet nights make people do stupid things." Then she left, and it was just me and the hum of the fluorescent lights. Around 11, a pickup truck pulled in. It was old, beat to hell, covered in dried mud. A guy got out wearing a brown jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He didn't look up when he walked in, just went straight to the beer cooler. I didn't think much of it. He came up to the counter a minute later with a 6-pack of Bud and paid in cash. "Long night ahead?" I asked, trying to make small talk. He didn't answer, just gave me a quick glance before walking back out. I watched him through the window as he stood there for a moment by his truck, like he was looking at something across the highway. Then he got in and drove off toward the dark stretch of road that disappeared into the cornfields. After that, nothing much happened for a while. I cleaned the coffee station, mopped the floor, and started restocking the chips. Sometime after midnight, I noticed something strange on the monitor. The camera pointing out toward the pumps flickered for a second, then went black. It wasn't uncommon for the old system to glitch, but when I tapped the side of the monitor, the feed didn't come back. I sighed, put down the box I was unpacking, and went to the door to look outside. The lot was empty. No cars, no lights except the dull glow from the sign overhead. Everything looked still. The wind had picked up, rattling one of the pump signs, but otherwise it was quiet. When I came back in, I decided to go check the wiring room in the back. The monitors and cameras ran through an old gray box mounted above the cleaning supplies. I was halfway through untangling some of the cables when I heard the front door chime. I froze. "Be right there," I called out, stepping out from the back. When I reached the counter, no one was there. The door was closed, and the lot was still empty. I checked the monitor for the inside cameras. They were working fine. Nothing. No movement at all. I told myself maybe the wind had pushed the door just enough to trigger the sensor. It had happened before. I shook it off, grabbed my coffee, and went back to stocking. Then around 1:30, I heard something that made my stomach drop. It was faint, but clear. Footsteps on the tile. I spun around. The store was empty again, except for the humming coolers and the low buzz of the lights. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. The sound came again, slow and deliberate, from the far aisle near the refrigerators. "Hello?" I said. No answer. I took a few steps forward, the sound of my own shoes echoing too loud. When I rounded the corner, the aisle was empty. But one of the cooler doors was open, just a crack, swinging gently. I walked over and closed it. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, tired, pale, and uneasy. When I got back behind the counter, I glanced at the monitors again. My heart skipped when I saw it. There was someone standing out by the pumps. The image was fuzzy, black and white, but clear enough to make out the shape of a man. He was just standing there, motionless, facing the store. I leaned closer. The timestamp read 1:42 a.m. I squinted, trying to see if maybe it was the same guy from the pickup earlier, but before I could focus, the feed cut to static again. "Come on. Not now," I muttered, tapping the side of the monitor. Nothing. I walked to the front window and looked out. The lot was empty. No truck, no man, nothing but the dark highway and the flicker of the gas sign. I waited a while, just staring out there, expecting to see movement. But nothing happened. So I locked the door, something I wasn't technically supposed to do, and went back behind the counter. At around 2:30, the smell hit me. It was faint at first, like something damp, earthy, and rotten. I thought maybe something in the trash had spoiled, but when I went to the dumpster out back, the smell only got stronger. I shined my flashlight toward the tree line behind the station, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone standing there, tall, unmoving, watching. But the light flickered, and the figure was gone. I told myself I was imagining things. I'd been up for almost 20 hours. Sleep deprivation can make you see all kinds of things. When I came back inside, I nearly jumped out of my skin. Someone had moved the coffee pot. It was on the opposite end of the counter from where I'd left it, with the lid open and steam rising from the half-full pot. The thing was, I hadn't brewed a fresh batch since 11. The machine was off. That was when I noticed something else. Muddy footprints on the tile, leading from the door to the counter. I backed away slowly, my pulse thudding in my ears. The prints were fresh, still damp, and stopped right in front of the register, like whoever made them had just stood there, staring at me. I grabbed the phone to call the manager, but the line was dead. No dial tone, no static, just silence. I was shaking by that point. I grabbed the small bat we kept behind the counter and checked the aisles again. Empty. Checked the bathroom. Nothing. Even the storage room was clear. But when I came back out, I heard the door chime again. Ding. Slow. Just once. The front door hadn't opened. That's when the lights started flickering. Every few seconds, they'd dim, buzz, then come back. Each time they flickered, the store looked different for just a heartbeat. Shadows in places they shouldn't be. Reflections moving when I wasn't. At 3:07 a.m., I saw him again. The monitor came back on by itself. The feed from the outside camera showed a man standing right at the edge of the pump lights. He wasn't moving, just facing the store. The image glitched for a second, and suddenly he was closer, right in front of the door. But when I looked up, the glass doors were empty. That was it for me. I wasn't sticking around to see what happened next. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the back door, only to find it wouldn't open. It was like it was sealed shut. I yanked on it until my hands hurt, but it wouldn't budge. I turned around to run for the front, but something caught my eye in the reflection of the freezer glass. There was someone standing behind me. I didn't turn. I couldn't. I just stared at the reflection. Tall figure, filthy clothes, face pale like it hadn't seen light in years. Its mouth hung open, like it was trying to speak, but couldn't. The lights flickered again, and when they came back, it was gone. I collapsed behind the counter, breathing hard. I don't know how long I stayed there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe an hour. The next thing I remember, I heard tires crunching outside. Headlights. It was my manager. When he walked in, I must have looked like hell. "What happened in here?" he asked. I didn't answer. I just pointed to the footprints on the floor. But they were gone. The floor was clean. The coffee pot was back where it should have been. Everything looked perfectly normal. I tried to tell him what I saw, but the more I talked, the less sense it made. He checked the cameras. Every feed between 1:30 and 3:30 a.m. was static. Nothing recorded. I quit that job the next day. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Brenda. She sounded rattled. Said she'd come in one morning to relieve the new night guy and found him standing in the parking lot, staring at the woods. When she asked what he was doing, he said he'd seen someone out there, someone waving him over. He never came back after that night either. A month later, the place shut down. Sometimes when I drive past it, the sign still flickers faintly, even though the building's been boarded up for years. And every once in a while, if you slow down and look at the windows, you can see a figure inside, standing by the counter watching the door. Story, the end. It was early December when I started working at the Old State Hospital on the outskirts of Jackson, Mississippi. I had just moved from Louisiana, desperate for work after the grocery warehouse where I'd been employed shut down. The hospital wasn't much to look at. Most of it had been closed for years, but the state kept a small wing operational for mental health patients and overnight observation cases. It was quiet, understaffed, and always short on maintenance money. The kind of place you could tell had stories soaked into the walls. I worked the night shift as a security guard, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., 5 nights a week. My duties were simple: make hourly rounds through the accessible halls, check the side doors, ensure no one wandered off, and keep an eye on the security cameras. It was lonely work, but I didn't mind that much at first. The first 2 weeks were uneventful. The halls echoed, the lights flickered, and sometimes the air vents made the building groan, but those were the normal sounds of an old structure. It was the kind of quiet you could get used to until things started changing. There was an unoccupied wing across from the observation area, Ward C, as the brass plate read on the peeling paint near the door. It had been closed since the 1980s, and every security guard before me had been told the same thing: don't go in there. It wasn't locked, but there was no reason to check it. The hospital director said it was unsafe, full of asbestos and falling ceilings. The only time I ever saw the door open was when the maintenance guy's store stored cleaning supplies inside. But on my third week, something odd happened. Around 1:45 a.m., I was sitting in the security office watching the cameras when I heard the distant sound of a door slamming. It came from somewhere down the west hall, toward Ward C. I checked the monitors, but half the cameras in that section had been broken for years. Frozen images of empty corridors showing the same dark stills over and over. I took my flashlight and headed out. As soon as I entered the west corridor, I felt the temperature drop. It wasn't a gentle chill. It was as if I'd walked into a freezer. My breath fogged. I remember that vividly because the heater was always blasting that time of year. The floor tiles in that hallway were cracked and uneven, and every step made a hollow echo that bounced too long off the walls. I reached Ward C, and the first thing I noticed was that the heavy metal door was open about a foot. The chain that used to loop around the handle was lying on the ground, snapped. I called out, "Maintenance? Anybody in there?" No answer. When I pushed the door open wider, the hinges groaned like something waking up after years of disuse. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, revealing long hallways lined with old patient rooms. Paint had curled and peeled off the walls in thick strips, and there was graffiti scrawled everywhere, mostly old tags from local kids who'd broken in years before. But among them were words scratched deep into the plaster. Words like, "Let us out," and "They never stopped." I should have turned around, but I stepped inside. About 30 feet in, I saw something move in the beam of my flashlight, a shadow slipping quickly across the hall. I froze. The air grew colder. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I called out again, but the sound of my voice felt swallowed, like the walls were absorbing it. I followed where I thought I'd seen the shadow. The hallway ended in double doors, their glass panels long since shattered. Beyond them was a room filled with overturned beds, broken IV poles, and rotting curtains that moved slightly though no air was blowing. And then I heard it, a soft humming, like someone was singing, a woman's voice, faint, almost tuneless. It came from one of the patient rooms. I backed away slowly, and the humming stopped. When I turned my flashlight toward the door, it shut on its own. I don't know how long I stood there, gripping the flashlight, too afraid to breathe. Finally, I managed to stumble backward toward the main hallway. The instant I crossed the threshold of Ward C, the air felt normal again, warm, breathable. I shut the door, re-looped the chain, and went straight back to the office. I didn't write anything in the report. Who would believe me? That morning, when my replacement Steve came in, he asked why I looked like I hadn't slept in a week. I told him I thought I heard someone in Ward C. He laughed and said, "You too, huh?" Then he leaned closer and said, "Every guard hears something eventually. Don't go poking around there. Trust me." I asked him what he meant, and he said, "They used to keep the violent ones in that wing. When they shut it down, they didn't exactly transfer everyone out the right way. You'll hear stories about patients who died locked in their rooms after a fire. They say the bodies were never all recovered." I laughed nervously, thinking he was trying to mess with me. But the next night, things got worse. At around 3 a.m., I was sitting in the office again when the motion sensor alarm went off. It was one of the hallway sensors near the old elevator bank. Nobody ever used those elevators anymore. They were decommissioned years ago. I switched to the camera feed, but all I saw was static. The monitor flickered and then cleared just long enough for me to see a figure standing there, motionless, facing the elevator doors. The image distorted, then cut out. I grabbed my flashlight and went to check it out. When I got there, the hallway was empty, but the elevator indicator light was on. It said B, meaning basement. The basement wasn't on my patrol list. I'd never been there, and the key ring they gave me didn't even have a key labeled for it. I went back to the office and asked the night nurse, a woman named Carol, if anyone ever used the basement. She looked uneasy. "No one goes down there," she said. "The morgue used to be down there years ago. They sealed it off after a flood back in '92. That gave me chills. Later that shift, while walking past the same elevator, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. There were wet footprints on the tile. Bare footprints. They led from the elevator down the hall toward Ward C and vanished just before the door. I bent down and touched one. It was cold, The water, or whatever it was, soaked into my fingertip. From that night on, the noises started. Sometimes I'd hear someone walking above me when I was alone in the west corridor. Other times there'd be soft tapping on the office window, even though it faced the courtyard where no one ever went after dark. Once, the phones rang with no one on the other end, just static and faint breathing. The more I tried to ignore it, the worse it got. One night, while making my rounds, I passed room 214, one of the observation rooms still in use. I saw a figure standing by the window inside. I thought it was one of the patients, so I went in. But the bed was empty, sheets tucked perfectly. The window blinds were shut tight. The reflection I'd seen wasn't there anymore, but the air smelled faintly of something metallic, like blood. Carol said she saw something too. She told me one morning that she'd been restocking meds when she saw a man standing at the end of the hall. He was pale, bald, wearing an old hospital gown stained yellow with age. He didn't move, just stared at her with this empty look. When she blinked, he was gone. That's when we started comparing notes. Other staff had seen similar things: reflections in dark windows, whispers when no one was there, patients claiming they saw people walking in the halls who weren't on the roster. By the 5th week, I wasn't sleeping right. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that hallway in Ward C, the peeling paint, the open door, the shadow moving just out of reach. One stormy night, the power went out around 1 a.m. The backup generator kicked in, but only half the lights came back on. The rest of the hospital was bathed in dim emergency red. The cameras all cut out, leaving me blind. Carol was on her break, asleep in the staff lounge. I was the only one awake when I heard it. Metal scraping against tile. It came from Ward C. I told myself it was the wind, maybe debris from the storm. But then I heard a voice. Soft, childlike. Help me. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I walked down the corridor. Every door looked darker than usual, the red emergency lights giving everything a bloody tint. When I reached Ward C, the chain was on the ground again, broken. The door was wide open. The sound came again, closer this time. Help me. It echoed from deeper inside the wing. I stepped through the doorway. The flashlight beam danced over the old rooms, revealing bits of furniture and moldy curtains. Then I saw movement. A small figure standing at the end of the hall. Looked like a little girl, barefoot, wearing what looked like a hospital gown too big for her. Her hair hung over her face. I froze. Hey, are you okay? Do you need help? She didn't move. Then, slowly, she tilted her head to the side. Her mouth opened, but instead of words, I heard that same humming again. The same haunting tune I'd heard weeks before, and then she wasn't there. She just vanished. The humming kept going, circling around me, though I couldn't tell where it came from. Something moved behind me. I turned, and for a split second I saw a tall man standing right behind me, pale, bald, in a tattered hospital gown. His mouth hung open too wide, like it had been dislocated. His eyes were solid black. The flashlight died. I ran. I don't remember how I got back to the office. I just remember bursting through the door and slamming it shut, my heart pounding, my hands shaking so hard I dropped the flashlight. Carol came running in, asking what happened. I couldn't answer. After that night, I quit. No notice, no goodbye. I left my badge on the desk and never went back. A month later, I got a call from Steve. He said the hospital had finally been shut down for good. Apparently, the basement had collapsed during that storm, and when they cleared the debris, they found something horrifying. Dozens of skeletons, some small, like children. Old reports said Ward C used to double as a holding area for experimental patients in the 1960s. People who were never released, never recorded as deceased, the ones no one wanted to remember. Steve asked if I'd ever seen anything weird there. I told him, yeah, too much. To this day, I still have dreams about that hallway, about that little girl humming. I'll wake up some nights and think I hear it faintly, like it's just outside my bedroom door. And every time it happens, I know I'll never forget that place. The walls that whispered, the shadows that never left, the cold that followed me home. Story the end.